Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I am glad that you guys can join me. As I always tell you, you could be anywhere. So I'm glad that you are here bright and early this Monday mornings are Monday mornings. But nevertheless, you're here. And so I do appreciate you guys joining me. I guess you did join me over the weekend for Morandi. That video, God, man, there was like 1,000 people here watching that video. So thank you all for being here. A lot of news. I want to give a shout out to the chat. The chat gets here very early. The chat gets here earlier than I do. So shout out to the chat. A lot of big news. And for one, there's a conversation that's supposed to take place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. I have no belief that anything is going to take place. The Istanbul 2 summit, quote unquote, that they call it, was effectively theater. Russia gave its demands, which were the same demands that he gave consistently since the first Istanbul summit, with the addition of the additional 4 or 5 regions that they effectively said, this is part of the Russian Federation, and you need to evacuate if you want, basically, a deal. And that deal needs to be sustainable going forward, not just some nonsense ceasefire. Zelensky looked more like a clown popping around doing one interview after the next, seeming very panicky, maybe even on something, and ultimately trying to convince Donald Trump, hey, I'm here. I'm actually, doing something, but Vladimir Putin didn't show up, even though Vladimir Putin never said he was going to show up. And under normal circumstances, delegations or let's say summits like this, agreements are made with teams first. The first Istanbul agreements didn't contain Zelensky and Putin. It contained their teams having conversations about the deal they were trying to work out. So all of this was effectively nonsense. Zelensky told his team to only focus on the ceasefire, which was always a non-starter and never even on the table. And why would it be on the table? The Russians are moving consistently westward. The Ukrainian military seems to be even weaker and weaker at being able to do anything about the fact that they're moving westward. So why would they stop? Especially considering the track record that the West has with the Minsk agreements, 1, 2 Istanbul agreements, blowing off every ceasefire, partial ceasefire that has come up. So their point of view was very clear. They sent several military officials to sit there and hear our demands. And if you don't agree to these demands, it's not going to be 4 regions next time. It's going to be 8 or 5 regions. It's going to be 8. I know in the media it was reported 6. From my understanding, they said 8, meaning we are going to keep going. Your military will collapse. We have 30,000 people signing up willingly, whereas you are running down the street chasing people in order to throw them in the vans, in order to press gang them into the military. It is a sad state of affairs, to put it mildly. So there's that. When Russia rejected the nonsense proposal that the U.S. was coming up with, Donald Trump said, okay, I'm going to make a phone call to Putin, as if that phone call is going to somehow change the perspective that Russia has had for the last year. Russia gave them a surrender document or surrender demand. They didn't want to accept the surrender demand, so the war continues. There's that. I'd be super interested whether anything comes out of that call. It's supposed to take place at 10 a.m. This show will be ending at the point where that conversation will be starting. So we would have to get to the tenor of that conversation tomorrow. There's that. Let's say a bumping heads in regards to the Iran deal. There's that. I told you before I was very cynical about that ceasefire or the nuclear talks. Cynical might not necessarily be the right word for it, but I was very dodgy about those talks. All things being equal, this stuff comes in the context of history. And in the context of history, we've seen Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iran being the last man standing. Trump is surrounded by a bunch of Zionists. And if you notice, his demands have only escalated over time. So they're effectively making a demand that they know would never be accepted. Now, I know some people, even in Iran, believe this is a bluff. I'm not sure this is a bluff. I don't know how you walk away from that cliff. You've effectively stated for the last month or so that you're going to bomb Iran if they don't take your deal. Okay, well, they're not going to take your deal. What do you do? What do? Do you walk back off that cliff? How do you walk back off that cliff? That's a hell of a cliff to walk back off. But hey, as people tell me, they give me the rational argument. And the rational argument says this will be a catastrophe for the U.S. I had Colonel Wilkerson pointing out that the U.S. will be militarily defeated. I had Master Sergeant saying, I'm sorry, that the U.S. will be militarily defeated. I had Master Sergeant say the U.S. will be militarily defeated. But that's a rational argument. When have ideologues been rational? They're called ideologues for a reason. They have an idea of the world. In fact, you can make the argument that the Ukraine war was built on ideas. This notion that, hey, Russia is just Nigeria with snow. We can use our economic dominance in order to help Ukraine's military, and we can take down Russia. Oh my God, that didn't happen. What do you know? Iraq, same thing, right? They're going to welcome us as heroes. They didn't welcome you as heroes, yet all sorts of creatures come out the woodwork like ISIS. And of course, we started using ISIS for our own ends, which is why Donald Trump was shaking the hand of that head chopper Jelani, and why they lift sanctions on Syria the moment that the deal had been done, which kind of shows that the gig was up. There was a lot of talk about this notion that there was a rift between Donald Trump and Netanyahu. And as we pointed out on the show, that even if that is true, that there's a rift between Israel and Netanyahu, that has nothing to do with the United States and Israel proper. Were they still giving bombs? Yes. Were they still giving diplomatic cover? I mean, for fuck's sake, they were at the ICJ arguing that they have the right to starve 2 million people. So I'm not quite sure where this rift came in at the point where they're arguing they should get 2 million people starved. And they're using language that Trump is doing, missing the fact that the language is consistent. When he says, oh my God, the starving Palestinians, it's so horrible that they're in the condition that they're in. As he gives bomb after bomb, bullet after bullet, billion after billion for them to starve and murder those people. So give me a break with this nonsense about, oh my God, Trump cares about the Palestinians because he made a speech about the Palestinians. He is leveraging the pain, the genocide that he himself is causing in order to create a context by which to say, so now we need to kick him out and move him to Libya, or now we need to kick him out and move him to Syria. After all, Jelani, he's our guy who's effectively in Syria. Maybe he'll take him. His language is only used for the purpose of political expedience for that end, not because he cares. How long has Trump been murdering Palestinians? And you believe that all of a sudden he cares? Or for that matter, how long has Trump been murdering Palestinians, chest thumping about murdering Yemenis on Twitter, no less, and tell me he cares about the Ukrainians? I'm sorry, he doesn't. He doesn't care about any of these people. These people are sociopaths. They don't care. On the other angle, speaking of sociopaths, Joe Biden. Apparently, Joe Biden is cancer. And Joe Biden has an aggressive form of cancer, no less. Don't take my word for it. Joe Biden, in fact, I would go so far as I said, told you himself. Oh, you think I'm lying? No. Joe Biden, who can't keep his story straight.
It had to put on
2022.
And because it was a 4-lane highway that was accessible, my mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening? It had to put on their windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why can't, for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
Yeah, he told you himself. Now the people around him say, that's a gaffe. That's a gaffe. Joe Biden didn't mean that. But if you notice, he said, I have cancer, and why the people in Delaware have the highest cancer rate in the nation, or something, to whatever he said there at the very end. That didn't sound like a gaffe. That sounded like Joe Biden being Joe Biden and telling the quiet part out loud. Now, before you feel any sympathy for Joe Biden, I would point out to you that this is kind of super ironic, since the media was just reporting that Israeli attacks rendered the last Gaza hospital for cancer treatment inoperable. Because guess what? Even though they're doing the bombing and the killings, and they're blowing up buildings and putting people under rubble. That's the big splashy headline. There's still people getting cancer treatments. You think people in Gaza don't have cancers? You think they don't have other medical illnesses, other issues? That they don't have gout, gas, intestinal issues that we have in the United States? No, they have all those things. They just have those things under heavy bombardment, heavy bombing. So it is super ironic to me that Joe Biden gets cancer at the same time that this report comes out that the last cancer center in Gaza is inoperable. God got involved. God got involved. To make this even wilder, the question now comes up in Coverup. When did you know it? When did you know it? When did you know it? Do we honestly believe that they found this out a few days ago, a week ago, 2 weeks ago? Do we honestly believe that it's PSA tests or whatever tests they use in order to delineate whether someone has a problem just came up recently? Do we really buy that? Joe Biden gets checked by a doctor when he was the president, year after year after year after year. That has to be the worst doctor in the world working at the White House if he couldn't necessarily figure out, say, hey, I think you have cancer. I think you have cancer. Somebody lied, and somebody has been lying for a while. And let's be very clear, his cancer-riddled body wanted to actually run in another election against Trump, believing that his cancer-riddled body was going to somehow beat Donald Trump in that election and wouldn't even get out the race, when I strongly suspect he knew he had a cancer-riddled body. There's that. So I will save my sympathies for the people who are living through this. Brian, I'm going to get to you right now. Give me one moment. Who are living through stuff like this. That's them blowing up tents. Or, for that matter, or this. Here's the other one that is just devastating to watch. But I'm going to show it anyway, because it should be shown. Yeah, that's an emergency vehicle being attacked by Israel. The same emergency vehicle that would take somebody to the hospital when they had cancer or some other illness. I will save my sympathies for the genocide or the people of the genocide that Joe Biden presided over, and not just presided over, paid for, fought for, argued for, by the way, when he would go to the ICC, when he would go to all of these other things in order to give them diplomatic cover, when he would, knowing they were starving the Palestinians, his own government tried to put out documents saying they were starving the Palestinians. And Blinken, Biden, and the people around him changed the report in order to make it look like he wasn't. They weren't. I will save my sympathies for them. I want to get to my guest, though. I am joined with the man himself, Brian Berletic. And just to give you a heads up, Brian Berletic is Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas on YouTube. Brian, welcome to the show, man. How you doing? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me back.
Always, man. You are a fan favorite. I think your analysis has often been spot on. And so, no, I deeply appreciate it. I'm sorry to bring you on as a hard pivot, going from me being an asshole about somebody having cancer. That is never a good look, to what we're talking about now. I guess they're somewhat related, though. And I guess the relation has to do with this notion of the split between Trump and Netanyahu. And it was in the media for almost like weeks. There's a split, there's a rift between Israel and the United States. Oh my God, is the US going to just dump Israel to the side? And there was even talk saying stuff like, what is Donald Trump going to do? Is he now going to focus on these other items? I want to play a clip for you. Marco Rubio said, the quiet part out loud. And mind you, Rubio was only boosting what Trump was saying when Trump was in an interview and said, I just want to nail this down. This notion that there's a split is nonsense.
Happened. Now, if I were,
Are you frustrated at all with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
no, look, he's got a tough situation. You have to remember there was an October 7th that everyone forgets. It was
Oh, the Joe Biden thing. Always invoke October 7th when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people being murdered by the Israeli government and when your government is effectively supporting it. The reason I'm showing that is because I use that to point out that for all of this talk about Donald Trump having a split with Netanyahu and that may somehow affect how he deals with Iran, I think it's nonsense. Give me a take on this, though.
You're absolutely right. There is no split. This is all theater. They did this all throughout the Biden administration. That could have been Biden sitting there saying those exact words.
Exactly.
This is what I've been trying to point out to people for years and years. At every presidential election, I tell people it's going to be continuity of agenda. Presidents, Congress, they do not make foreign or domestic policy. Unelected corporate financier interests do. They put all of their plans in publicly available policy papers. You can read Which Path to Persia from the Brookings Institution, 2009. They have a whole chapter. It's literally titled, Leave It to Bibi, which is a nickname for Benjamin Netanyahu, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. And then in that chapter, it says, the United States would encourage and perhaps even assist, and of course do this covertly, the Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves. And we could imagine these are in reference to strikes on Iran, but it could be strikes on Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen. The Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves in the expectation that both international criticism and retaliation would be deflected away from the United States and onto Israel. And Israel would be doing this with full knowledge that they would be assuming all responsibility and all of the retribution for any action that they take. They would go into this deal knowing that this is theater. There is no split. They did this right ahead of the U.S. pulling back, not out of, but back from their military operations in Yemen. They're still providing all of the intel and the weapons to Israel to continue carrying out these brutal attacks on civilian infrastructure designed specifically to cripple Yemen's economy, just like they're doing to Gaza. So this, anytime you hear about a rift between the U.S. and Israel, it means the U.S. needs to do something horrible that they want plausible deniability for. Yes, you were just showing on the screen the cover of Which Path to Persia, which I've been talking about almost since it was published. And I warned people when everyone was celebrating President Barack Obama and the Iran deal, and they were saying, America is really pivoting. We're leaving that terrible legacy of imperialism behind. We're going to make good with Iran and start a new chapter forward. I warned people. I said, this is literally, there's a whole chapter about making deals with Iran, deliberately sabotaging it, blaming it on Iran, and then using that as a pretext to escalate vis-a-vis Iran. That is literally what they did. President Obama half-heartedly implemented it or really didn't implement it at all. He signed off on it, continued undermining Iran, continued undermining and attacking all of Iran's allies in the region. And then President Trump came into office and he unilaterally walked away from it. And now he's trying to push forward almost an identical deal with Iran because, again, this is part of the game. You pretend you want diplomacy. You pretend you have nothing to do with that mad dog in the Middle East, Israel. And then when something horrible happens, you say, we tried, we were pursuing diplomacy. It was Israel who provoked this. It was Iran who provoked this. And they're doing the exact same thing with this conflict in Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine is a US war on Russia. It was maliciously, deliberately started by the US, and it continues entirely because the US wants it to continue. And they've created all of these excuses, all of these scapegoats to push responsibility away from themselves onto everyone else, and including and especially Russia. You could already see how they're setting the narrative up. Russia doesn't want peace. They're not serious about peace. They don't want to end the bloodbath. So they left us no choice. We have to escalate. We have to pursue sanctions. We have to flood Ukraine with more weapons. We have to do this. We have to do that. So this is what they do. It's one playbook, and they use it over and over and over again.
Yes, I'm glad you make that point. I've spoken to so many people on the issue of Iran, and what they give me is the rational argument. Oh my God, it would be a catastrophe. I mean, the U.S. doesn't even fully know the capabilities of Iran, and the oil market will go through the roof, et cetera, et cetera. And as I point to them, ideologues are not necessarily rational. And to make the point, you know, when you're listening to Iran was very clear from the very beginning. We are not getting rid of enrichment. That's a non-starter. It's not something that we're going to do. And in the very beginning of it, you got a more amenable Trump administration. And then his plan started to escalate. And it went from, okay, 3.6% to, well, we need the Libyan model, meaning the fact that you would even use the term Libyan model after Gaddafi got started machete is pretty outstanding, right? But we need the Libyan model. We need all enrichment to go away. And then at the recent Saudi humiliation of the U.S., where he was shaking the hand of a head chopper, a literal head chopper, like meaning the hand that Trump shook was the hand that Jelani was using to chop off heads. Tough guy, good looking. We're getting rid of sanctions. Apparently, Saudi Arabia, Qatar paid off all of the excess debt because now they've gotten what they wanted. The Saudis have put all of the money into overthrowing Syria. It's overthrown. The U.S. was involved in doing so under Obama for what, billions of dollars a year. It's done. Let's get rid of the sanctions. Let's hope the economy comes back on some level. And let's now get this new jihadists in a good position to move forward in Syria. I guess I'm pointing out that the same thing is happening with the Iran deal. Listen to what Witkoff, the realist of the fact, had to say on ABC News.
Well, the president has been very clear. He wants to solve this conflict diplomatically and with dialogue. And he's given all the signals. He's directly sent letters to the supreme leader. I have been dispatched to deliver that message as well, and I've delivered it. But on the other hand, we have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of an enrichment capability. We've delivered a proposal to the Iranians that we think addresses some of this without disrespecting them. And so that's important. We want to.
That red line is nonsense. That red line is nonsense. That red line was always nonsense. But one, we shouldn't even be having a conversation with Iran, right? Like the notion that you're telling a sovereign country what they can and can't do is outrageous. There are other organizations that can be more involved in this as opposed to the U.S. Two, the notion that the U.S. starts off the negotiation with, we will bomb you if you don't accept our deal, and then escalate the terms of the deal over the course of the negotiation where they're all over the place. Okay, so it sounds like you're just looking for a war.
Yeah. It almost seems like they want a war. They just want to appear to be pursuing diplomacy, and they want to blame Iran for the reason this diplomacy doesn't pan out, which is exactly what they say they're going to do in the policy papers over and over again throughout every presidential administration. What I want people to do is just stop, because what I see them doing is they feel obligated to pick, oh, am I a Democrat? Am I Republican? Am I pro-Trump? Am I pro-Biden? If it was Kamala Harris, she would have been shaking Jelani's hand or whatever she would be doing because she's a woman and he probably wouldn't shake her hand, but maybe bowing to him from across the room or something. I don't know. But it's exactly what would have happened if the other guy or girl won the election, because it is continuity of agenda. It is one single agenda. It was always about regime change. Regime change in Syria is not because they just want to take over Syria. It's because they want to isolate Iran. The U.S. just carried out a military campaign, a brutal military campaign, and now they've handed it over to Israel, and they're backing Israel in continuing this military campaign against Yemen, against Ansar Allah, because it's in a bid to further isolate Iran. So they are going to continue putting pressure on Iran, encircling it, containing it, undermining it. And I hear people say, well, they would never go to war with Iran. It would be disaster. What makes you think their goal is to actually fight and win a war against Iran? Look, they invaded Syria. They were waging proxy war against Syria. they couldn't do it through direct military force, so they did it through other means. The goal isn't here. The goal isn't to necessarily defeat Iran or defeat Russia or to defeat China outright. It is to prepare the battlefield, create the conditions in which they can continue encircling, containing, and deterring progress. They do not want multipolarism to continue developing, so they're trying to destroy it faster than it can develop and establish itself. That is the actual goal. So they don't necessarily have to defeat or overthrow the government in Iran. If they could, they would. They would love to. If that's an opportunity, they would definitely do it. But they're very happy with things far short of that. The whole conflict in Ukraine, for example, other policy papers admit there's almost no possibility of defeating Russia in Ukraine. But the goal is to extend Russia. You extend them, you force them to invest in this protracted, large-scale, intense military conflict. That money, those resources are unavailable to, say, support and defend Syria, which is why Syria collapsed, partly the reason why. And it prevents Russia from contributing to the overall global rise of multipolarism. If they were not tied up in Ukraine, they would be spending more time in Africa, helping those countries throw off Western imperialism, develop their own nations, and take control over their own destiny. That's what they would be doing. This is what China would be doing on a much larger scale. They did not have to worry about some sort of conflict with the United States over Taiwan or U.S. maritime blockade, either in Asia Pacific or beyond Asia Pacific. So it forces these countries to divert resources away from moving the world forward, and it allows the U.S. to buy time for its primacy. Yes. What was that?
There was the article, Overextending Russia and Unbalancing Women. Overextending and Unbalancing Russia. That was the article. I know it was a policy paper you're referring to, but they also had an article on the same thing.
Yeah, because
it's the way it's playing out. In fact, I remember there was an article that came out where Joe Biden was effectively saying, yeah, we have back channel communication with the Russians. We know how far we can go before they flip up, which means, and you can even kind of look at it in the way that we were giving them weapons. Okay, we'll give you this. Okay, they've countered that. Now we'll give you this. Now we'll give you this. Like it was always given this stuff in piecemeal ways that was never going to change the context of the battlefield. It was always just to keep Ukraine going longer and longer and longer. And if you think about what the Europeans are doing, and even what Trump is doing, what Trump is saying is, let's freeze it. We're not going to give you really any deals per se. I mean, we may put more weapons in Ukraine. We may build up the military again, but let's just freeze it. It's amazing to me that they think the Russians, after Minsk 1 and 2 or the Istanbul agreements, that they would go for that. And yet they put that out there. It's the weirdest thing in the world to me.
And that is literally the plan. I hear people say all the time, no, that's not President Trump's plan at all. That's the Europeans, that's the Ukrainians talking about that.
It's literally Trump's plan. It's Kellogg's plan.
It's literally, and no, it's not even Kellogg's plan. It was U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and I say this every time I come on the show. It's February 12th. The transcript is on the Department of Defense's official website, and he sits there and he's like, we got to freeze the conflict. You got to put European troops on the ground, essentially create a buffer zone, monitor the line of contact. So that's not, if you're monitoring the line of contact, you didn't end the conflict. You froze it. You froze it. Right. We have to target Russia's economy. So sanctions, which is exactly what Biden did for 4 years straight. More arms, more ammo, more support for Ukraine militarily, expand America and Europe's military-industrial complex, and create a division of labor to delegate the pursuit of American primacy. Europe, you need to take more responsibility for freezing this conflict in Ukraine and holding Russia at bay, tying them up basically. So when we go to Iran or we go to China, Russia does not have the resources to aid their allies elsewhere. They are totally tied up in Ukraine. That is the plan. And it's in multiple policy papers spanning many years. I talked about Wes Mitchell, 2024 strategic sequencing revisited. And he literally laid out exactly what, and that was 2024, literally what Secretary Hegseth put in that directive in Brussels earlier this year. So that is the plan. That is the only plan. There is no plan for diplomacy, ending the conflict. Talks, again, are just theater to convince people, and it works. You see so many people still utterly convinced that at least part of the Trump administration, they're starting to admit, at least there's corners of the Trump administration that are intent on war. Kellogg, maybe Rubio, but it is the entire administration. This is good cop, bad cop. This is all theater. It's all about perception management, public perception management and diplomatic perception management.
But even within that context, though, I used to call it American point of view. Like, it's this notion of the good cop is still a nonsense proposal. Like, if they think that the Kellogg plan is a peace plan, they're out of their minds. They're out of their minds. Like, the idea that the Russians is going to accept European or U.S. troops, or European troops, let's say European troops, for a division of concerns, European troops on Ukrainian soil is a non-starter. Like, all of these things are non-starters. And yet, you would think that if people even had an inkling of the Russian point of view of this, that they would say, okay, well, Russia is never going to accept that. But they don't do that. You're right. They say, well, Kellogg is trying to have a peace plan. Witkoff is trying to have a peace plan. It's that horrible Rubio that is crashing Donald Trump's plans. Oh, if it wasn't for Rubio, that Donald Trump will be able to do a peace plan. They're out of their minds. The only question for me is what in Trump's mind, because I'm super curious about it. I know that's a dark place with all sorts of corners and spiders. But I am very curious about whether or not in his mind it's, well, I want to have peace. And this is the way an American president can have peace. Or is it just nothing there? And whatever somebody dumps into him is what he repeats. I don't know.
That's it.
Yeah, you think it's that one?
It's exactly that. He's a performer. He's a salesman, a dishonest salesman. This was his whole life. He's been a dishonest businessman and a public performer. He performed in professional wrestling skits. Like, I mean, look it up on YouTube. And he had a reality TV show that spans many, many years. And if you watch it, this is literally what he's doing now. It is a performance. They take the policy papers, they give it to his administration, who are all neocon warmongers, facilitators of the deep state, and they tell him, and he repeats it. He doesn't even do a good job repeating it. Again, I always point this out, and this is just one example of many. He thinks the S in BRICS is Spain. He thinks Spain is in BRICS. He doesn't know anything about what's going on. He's just repeating what he's told and not even doing a good job at that. And it's exactly like Biden. It's just a different style, different excuses, different branding, different target markets. So MAGA is targeting a different target market of the American population and the global population. And it's meant to appeal to different types of people and get them on board for a little while, and then be so offensive to people who don't support it that they will take the extreme opposite, which is also a market position the U.S. has cornered. So that, the lefty liberal and the conservative right, the U.S. controls both of these spaces. So it doesn't matter which camp you go into, and what part of the tent you're holding up the whole tent of America, the continued pursuit of American primacy. And I always tell people, go back to first principles. What is the United States for real? It is not a republic with an elected president who serves the interests of the American people. It is a Washington that serves the interests of unelected corporate financier interests. They are the ones driving the policy. What they want is what the U.S. pursues, and it's just a matter of selling that to the American people, convincing them that Wall Street, their agenda, is somehow America's agenda. When he went into the Middle East, what was he doing? Why was he in the Middle East? Why isn't he working on the cost of living, the cost of education, the cost of healthcare, crumbling infrastructure back in the United States? These are everyday concerns of Americans, regardless of political affiliation. He's not working on that. He's working on, people will say, oh, DEI and the border issue. And he solved it. He didn't solve any of these things. The right-wing media is simply not talking about it anymore. You think there's no more illegal immigrants walking around in the United States? And did he even talk about, let alone address the root cause of that, which is U.S. foreign policy destroying Latin America, forcing these people to leave their homes. People don't leave their homes unless there is a real big problem that necessitates them to leave. So you can see how this is a process of controlling people, managing perception, but ultimately continuity of agenda driven by these unelected interests. Their goal is global primacy. They are corporate financier monopolies. They do not want competition. I always bring up the New York Times article from all the way back in 1992. That was U.S. foreign policy at the end of the Cold War. The title of the article was U.S. Strategy Plan Calls for Ensuring No Rivals Develop. That was the strategy and objective then, and that's what it is to this day. That is what the U.S. is still pursuing. If you go to Project 2025, which is the playbook Trump is verbatim pulling policy out of, that was published in 2023. And under the section, the chapter about the Department of Defense, it's talking about American military primacy over the entire planet, controlling Asia so that China isn't the most powerful nation in Asia. The US wants to prevent China, which is located in Asia and is the largest, most powerful country, from being the most powerful country in Asia. So that is the problem. And until people face that and realize that none of these people in Washington, regardless of party or the promises they make, none of these people serve the American people's best interests or America as a nation state's best interests.
Yeah, I do think Joe Biden was a true believer, though. Meaning Joe Biden had geopolitical aims. He believed in American primacy, which is why I strongly suspect nobody had to convince him for that nonsense war in Ukraine, or nobody had to convince him to allow Israel to do what it is doing. Whereas Trump, yeah, I agree with you. I think they're just dumb stuff in his head. He's just repeating whatever he's told. I mean, as you point out, he does it poorly. J.D. Vance does a much better job articulating Trump than Trump does.
Just barely. I think just barely. I don't know why. I guess because Trump is such an empty vessel, people are beginning to gravitate to J.D. Vance, but it's only relative to Trump. He's not some. Right. And he'll end up being the next candidate or something. We'll have to suffer 4 to 8 years of that.
Yeah, oh God, man, you're so right. Like, MAGA went into this. God, man, it's such a bait and switch. MAGA goes into this thing. Oh my God, Trump is going to stop these wars. He's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize. He is going to have no tax on tips. He's not going to go after Medicare or Medicaid, Social Security. He's doing all of those things, meaning no tax on tips is not in the Republican bill. They're gutting Medicaid to the tune of like $1 trillion. He is not just walked away from the war in the way that Steve Bannon said, walk the F away. Well, he's not doing that. He's effectively doing another Joe Biden at this point. All down the line, all of those things have been broken promises. As you point out, the border stuff has been performative. Him deporting somebody for criticizing Israel, is so anti-American, it is hard to kind of even countenance that. But B, MAGA is like, yeah, get that foreigner out of the country. Missing the fact that foreigner is a brain that may immigrate to the U.S. to better your country. But instead, in their minds, that foreigner is criticizing America, get him out. Look at Donald Trump doing great on the border. It's bizarre. It's super bizarre. And by the way, you see the same thing for Joe Biden. The Democrats, liberals, are for the war. And so if Donald Trump keeps it going, they would applaud if they keep it going. Oh, look at Donald Trump keeping that war going. That is great. That is fantastic that Donald Trump is keeping it going. They may complain about him not doing, well, he's only given, $50 billion. He didn't give, $100 billion. They may do that. But all things being equal, they're for it. They're lockstep in line with this notion of geopolitical expansion. Both sides on the same page. It's very wild. You're absolutely right. American primacy around the globe, multipolarity. And he does this thing of saying the opposite of what he's actually doing, if that makes sense. Like, I'm helping the Gazans by ethnically cleansing them out of Gaza. I believe in peace in Ukraine by ignoring the fact that we lost the war in Ukraine. Like, this stuff is nonsense, but it's exactly what takes place in regards to the way he sells it. You're right. He's a salesman. He's just up there to sell it.
And people are so polarized. And what I noticed President Trump doing, and people who support him the way they react to it. He will say one of everything. So he's for and against it at the same time. He will one day he's for it, the next day he's against it. And in people's minds, because they went out so far on a limb to support him, and they're like, well, at least it's not Kamala Harris. In their brain, they're only going to latch on to what they want to hear, and they will ignore everything else he said, contrary to what they want him to say and what they think he stands for.
Right.
And that's what I see people doing. So out of one side of his mouth, he's like, oh, I've got a big problem with Benjamin Netanyahu. I got a big problem with what Israel's doing. And then the next day he's like, I got no problem with Benjamin Netanyahu. And these are all, obviously, like, if you take all of the rhetoric, you filter it out, and you just look at the cold hard facts. Israel cannot conduct military operations without constant and complete support from the United States. So if President Trump had a real problem with Israel, he would cut that. He's not cutting it because he doesn't have a problem. And everything else is theater. People really need to start cutting through the rhetoric. Follow the money, follow the arms, the weapons, and read the policy papers. They have signed and dated plans of everything that they're doing and how and why they're doing it. There's no mystery here. You just got to take time. I know it's boring. The papers are long. But you can do it. People can do it, and they need to do it, because otherwise you're allowing, whether you want to blame Trump or not, he's complicit one way or another. Whether you want to focus on him or not, this whole system, the deep state that people voted him into office to fight against, it will continue, and you're allowing it to kick the can down the road by getting distracted with all of this rhetoric and not cutting through it and seeing the continuity of agenda, exposing it, speaking up against it, and finding ways to stop it.
Yeah, nobody, I mean, it's fascinating to me. I mean, it doesn't seem to matter. Like, as I tell people, when I was looking at the whole Iran-US negotiations, that there's a context that didn't seem to matter with political party, whether it was Obama, whether it was Bush, whether it was Joe Biden. You had Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, all of them being taken down. And whether it was Libya under Obama, whether it was Syria under Obama, because let's be honest, it was Obama that was effectively paying billions of dollars in order to try to overthrow the Syrian government. He just couldn't do it in that time frame. And what did they do? They froze the conflict. And what did people think in their minds? The conflict is over. Well, the conflict wasn't over, it was frozen. When Trump comes in, what does he do? He protects Idlib, which is where Jelani was effectively setting up his fiefdom. And yes, all of a sudden, it explodes. Oh my God, the conflict apparently is not over with. And at the most inopportune time for the Syrian government is overthrown. Then after the fact, after the crime has been committed, you get Trump coming in, shaking Jelani's hand. He's a good-looking guy. He's tough pass. Yeah, the tough pass and chopping people's head off, but okay, let's, yada, yada past that. Sanctions removed. Now we can get back to normal with our guy in charge. Meaning this idea of Trump being a peace candidate is nonsense. Donald Trump was every bit as instrumental as overthrowing the Syrian government as anybody else, whether it was Obama or anybody else. And keep in mind, the sanctions for Syria go all the way back to George Bush first. Meaning it was George Bush first, George Bush administration. I'm sorry, George Bush Jr. was instrumental in saying, all right, we need to go after Iran, so we need to go after Syria in order to go after Iran. There's a continuity of purpose. And I think that's your point, that regardless of the president, there's a continuity in regards, at the very least, foreign policy. I would argue domestic policy also, that is a thread running through all of these presidents. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What do you think is going to happen with the talks? I mean, I agree with you. I think these things are theater. I think Donald Trump is going to try to push Putin, thinking his charm, or whatever charm he believes he has, is going to somehow make the difference between what Russia considers to be foreign policy. I mean, the notion that Trump is acting like he's a mediator when he is a party to the war is pretty outrageous. What do you think is going to happen in these talks?
It is America's war. It is America's war, solely America's war, and they are fighting it through both Ukraine and Europe. I hear a lot of people say Europe wants the US to stay in Europe. For what? There is no national security threat facing Europe. Nobody's trying to invade or take over Europe. Russia and Europe were working together closer and closer. And even Europe and China were working together closer and closer until the US maliciously, deliberately, violently overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, and then assumed control over both the political government, the military, and the intelligence agencies. They have full control over it. And it is now an extension of US foreign policy. This is not a war being fought by and for Ukraine. It is a war being fought through Ukraine. This is an extension of America. They just don't want to fight the war directly with Russia because they're both nuclear armed superpowers. And so that they're trying to avoid that. So it is a proxy war. And there's even people in the Trump administration that have admitted it's a proxy war, but then they still, again, like we were saying, they say that 1 minute, and then the next minute they're saying, oh, those Europeans are trying to undermine our talks, and Zelensky's being so difficult. You overthrew the government in Syria, and you're shaking hands with the literal head of Al Qaeda in Syria, but you can't get Zelensky out of office. You can't do that. I think you could do that, and it's just like with Israel. Nothing Ukraine does can be done without complete and constant support from the U.S. first and foremost, and they're transferring all of this onto Europe. And Europe is doing this at Europe's own expense. There's no benefit at all whatsoever for Europe in doing this. They have already suffered throughout this conflict, first being cut off from cheap Russian hydrocarbons, deindustrializing their economies, and all the destabilization that has taken place because of the conflict in Ukraine, the flood of refugees, millions of people fleeing the country, emptying out their arsenals, sending all of that to Ukraine, creating unprecedented tension, needless tension with Russia, which never and still to this day does not have any ambitions to invade Europe. And they know that. That's why they're happy to empty out their arsenals. They have nothing in their arsenals because they know Russia's not going to storm into Germany, or, I mean, do people imagine they're going to come onto the shores of the UK or something? It's ridiculous. And so the talks cannot go anywhere. It's up to Russia. Russia has to make a decision. Do we allow the U.S. to corner us into this ceasefire? The U.S. is going to use to freeze it, just like they did Syria, for the exact part. No intention at all, 0% interest in any sort of diplomatic conclusion to this conflict. They're trying to freeze it or slow it down so that they could keep it going for as long as possible and bleed Russia to the fullest extent possible. So Russia either has to agree to some kind of ceasefire and hope that they can make better use of the time than the collective West can, which is what they did during Minsk 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. I don't think they really thought that was going to end in any sort of diplomatic settlement. I don't think that they did. I think they have to say that because of how bad it looks. But I think they cynically said, we're not ready. They don't want to admit that they were so weak, they were not ready then. They needed time to get ready. Mm-hmm. And then the special military operation was, it's either now or never. So they either agree to this because they think they can make better use of the time than the West does, or they're going to continue pushing on the battlefield. And then it's going to be up to the U.S. for the mask to fully drop off and put maximum pressure on Russia. And you will see a coordinated campaign across European, American, Western media in general to make it appear as if Russia was the one disinterested in peace. President Trump did everything he could. It was the Russians or someone else, but it's not going to be America that decided to continue with their own war that they themselves started and could at any time of their choosing end.
Agreed. Yeah, that's what they're doing now. I mean, if you look at the media, it's like Putin didn't show up to the negotiations with Zelensky. Okay, well, Putin never said he was. And then under normal circumstances, that's not what really happens. Zelensky is the one who came out and was like, well, I'm showing up at the negotiations. I am curious about why Europe goes through with this. I mean, for all intents and purposes, as you point out, they're damaging themselves. They're being deindustrialized. You have money to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars that are fleeing out of Europe into the U.S., either in weapons or, for that matter, in LNG, where we're charging like 5 times more than they would typically pay. What is the thought that, okay, once we overthrow Russia, we get our hands on those resources which would compensate us? I don't see that happening. So what is the end goal? What is the end game for Europe in this? It doesn't seem like it's to their betterment in any sense of the word.
Well, to answer that question, we have to ask ourselves, why is Ukraine doing this? Because Ukraine is being destroyed almost brick by brick as part of this proxy war. Why? How did that happen? The U.S. politically captured Ukraine. The U.S. has also politically captured Europe. They have controlled Europe for decades. The European Union is a bureaucratic layer that was like a wet blanket thrown over the sovereignty of all of these individual countries. And you can see, this tension between each of these countries' interests within each of these European countries versus the European Union. The European Union is asking these countries to again, just like Ukraine, fall onto your sword for what? For all of these rhetorical reasons, but ultimately it's for American primacy. The division of labor that Secretary Hegseth was just repeating like a parrot from all of these policy papers published by corporate-funded think tanks. The whole purpose is to get Europe to do what Wall Street wants them to do for Wall Street at Europe's expense. That is the whole purpose of having a proxy. Europe is not an American ally. They're not partners. They are proxies just like Ukraine. Ukraine is the most expendable. But if the US has to sit there and decide, it's either we throw Europe into this next or deeper into it because it's already into it, or do we give up American primacy over the planet? Do we just accept that? And the answer is we're going to put Europe deeper into this. And the European Union will be instrumental. And it's going to be up to the weakened sovereign institutions in each one of these European countries to try to fight back against this. But they're unable to because they've been cut off from Russia. They are being cut off from China. And so they're isolated and they're at the mercy of the U.S. and the corporate interests that constitute U.S. power.
Yeah, I think I've said this myself, that the U.S. looks at Europe as a proxy every bit as much as it looks at Ukraine as a proxy. Yes. And it would feed Europe into the wood chipper every bit as much as it's feeding Ukraine into the wood chipper. And Europe doesn't seem to know that, or at the very least, they don't act like they know that. They think, I get the sense, look, I think you're right, but I also get the sense that Europe believes that we're in it together. Like, it's like the Western world, the 14% of the global, whatever, we're in it together, which is why Europe lumps in with the superpower. Missing the fact that that's not the way we look at it. And I remember I've had conversations with Europeans. I was like, you realize we don't look at it that way, right? Like, meaning I live here. We don't look at you as equals. I mean, J.D. Vance made it clear when he was like, we don't care what Europe thinks. Like, they're just saying it quite out loud. We don't care what you think. This is what we're going to do. But they don't think that. At least I don't think they think that. Not from the Europeans that I've spoken to. They think somehow we're in this together. And that's not the way it works. I mean, the oil and gas thing was a really good example. When Europe was cut off from Russian gas, the US was like, hey, good. We can now charge you 5 times more because you need this product. And you can't do without this product. Great. We didn't look at it like we're in it together, so we're going to share the burden. That's not the way we think about this. Do you think they know that? And maybe I'm wrong on this. Do you think they know that we're not in this together?
I think you're onto something. Part of politically capturing a country is putting in people with a very specific psychological profile. These are people that do not have impressive human qualities. If you look at anybody in the European Union as part of that bureaucracy, who's going to argue against me on that? Nobody can do that. So you look at these people who know nothing about how the real world works. They are career politicians, they've been in law and politics their whole life. They have no connection to the real world, industry, work, infrastructure, military matters. They have no idea what's going on. And they pick people who are incapable of getting to a position like that on their own. So from their point of view, they are like parasites latched on to the United States. They know that this is the best ride they're going to get. They're not going to be able to achieve this station in life any other way. And so they're willing to do anything. And I see that here in Asia. The US constantly politically interferes here in Asia. They have political parties that are funded by the US, and the political leaders of these parties and the people heading these organizations are not just profoundly ignorant and naive, but they're also egomaniacs. They have starving egos that they couldn't feed on their own. The U.S. sees that and exploits that. And this is what empire has done all throughout history. They find the weakest link. They find the fault lines in a society. They expand them. They divide people, and they find the weakest people and put them into positions of power because you can easily manipulate them. You don't want to put someone who's strong and competent and has a mind of their own, because they're going to realize, why are we throwing Europe into this proxy war with Russia,
Right.
who used to sell us cheap energy, which allowed us to compete internationally in terms of industry? Why would we do that? You have to find people dumb enough to be okay with that and go along with it constantly. Dumb enough or selfish and short-sighted enough, because you look at some of these proxies the U.S. creates and the very unfortunate ends that sometimes they meet.
Mm-hmm.
How come they didn't see that coming? How come they couldn't understand they were being used and that they're expendable? How come they didn't understand that? Like South Vietnam, for example. It's just they pick people specifically that cannot see that, because anybody else wouldn't go along with it.
Taiwan, another good example. Philippines, another good
Exactly.
example. It's like,
Exactly.
you're really picking a fight with China? Is that really what you're doing right now? And you really believe that the U.S. is going to come to your aid and have a nuclear war to defend Taiwan? Is that the thought? Like, meaning, I don't get, like, after seeing Ukraine, you would think that the world would say, hey, that's an example for the ages. Let's not do that. That's not what they do, though. You still have these countries willing to, shoot themselves in the kidneys or in the heart or whatever, and still go down that pathway. From your take on this, though, okay, the talks are going to go nowhere. Trump's is probably going to increase sanctions. For the Iran thing, that also is not going to go anywhere. Iran is going to stand their ground. They're going to tell the U.S. to F off. The U.S. is probably going to turn a blind eye to Israel having some kind of attack, because Israel has already said we would attack at the time and place of our choosing. And the U.S. is like, well, we tried to negotiate. We did everything we could. And, Israel just kind of did its own thing. Does anybody believe for a moment that the U.S. is going to say anything to Israel if it attacks Iran? I don't think anybody, at least not on this channel, does. The European elections for the moment, Simon, fair election, unfair election?
It's irrelevant.
Because I think this makes your point
It's
better.
irrelevant. I think it's irrelevant. So many people become fixated on these elections, and you have to just look at the history. Just look from 2013, 2014 to today. So this is over 10 years. What difference has any election made in Europe? I mean, even people like Viktor Orban in Hungary. What difference has it made? When the pressure is on, he signs off on everything that they tell him to do. So what difference did it make that he was in office?
Or he abstains.
Well, I mean, and then you have to ask yourself, is this just a way of managing people in Europe who are starting to wake up? Obviously, they have a plan for that, because they're doing it in the United States. The reason you have Democrats and Republicans, and they pretend to be diametrically opposed, but they are completely in cooperation with one another. The Obama administration built the stairs for Trump to go up, and then he built some stairs for Biden to go up. And that's how it works. Why wouldn't it work like that in the European Union, which the U.S. has politically captured and transformed into an extension of itself?
See, for some reason, I feel Europe is slightly different. Like, the people are slightly different. Like, I tell you, when I was in France, there was, the farmers brought cows into the middle of the highway in order to stop the traffic as a protest for what the government was doing. Or the Yellow Vest movement, for example, being out there for 2 years, some insane amount of time. If you couldn't sustain a protest like that in the United States for 2 days or 3 days, let alone, Black Lives Matter, fair enough. But those were economic matters, not these kind of racial fault lines that were in the United States that really only serve the Democratic Party in the way that they were effectively leveraged. I guess I'm saying, do you see Europe as being, the public in Europe as being different? I mean, look at the AfD, for example. Well, okay, the AfD was radioactive 10 years ago. The AfD is like the number 2 party in Germany. Marie Le Pen's party, National Rally, again, radioactive. I mean, fuck's sake, that goes back to Vichy, France, #1 party in France. And if they had a fair election, she would most likely win it. Of course, she was taken out by, let's say, legal issues that prevented her, just so happened to prevent her from running for 7 years. But I hope you get my point, though. Even in Romania, I mean, look at the extravagant measures that they had to effectively take. That stuff kind of takes the mask off. Like, that's not, we are taking subversive action in order to do X, Y. That is, we are literally canceling an election because this guy is going to win this election, and we don't want this guy to win the election because he wants to prevent a military base from being on the Black Sea. Okay, that's pretty astonishing. And if you're a population of Romania and seeing that, how do you look away from the fact that for the first time, they literally canceled an election in the second round when it looked like the guy was going to win it? I guess I'm saying they seem to be taking far more aggressive, overt action in Europe in a way that is unhideable. How do you hide that? How do you do that in a subversive way? And I would have to think that they're doing it for a reason. Is it because the population in Europe is far more inclined to flip out when things like this take place, whereas the US is more anesthetized? People have their Xbox, they have their girlfriend, boyfriend, they have their jobs that they're stuck with, that they can't deviate from. Is it different in Europe?
Well, I do see there are differences, and I would say people are more inclined to protest there in Europe. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, people come out and they protest. And then what? What if the government just ignores you? And what if they just keep rigging the elections? Then what do you do? And then you have to ask yourself, if you're going to have a big movement or some kind of revolution, you need to have circles of interest with money, power, the ability to actually do things, to do the physical things to change the country one way or another, peacefully or not peacefully.
Yeah.
Where are those interests? Who are those interests? Where are they going to get their money, their organization, their resources? When you look at, say, in Ukraine, the U.S. was behind the armed mobs that overthrew the central government. The government itself, it was an entire country with its institutions and its resources, but it was incapable of standing up to this U.S.-backed power. Russia was obviously trying to back the other side, and the separatists, the rebels in eastern Ukraine, obviously. And so without some large collection of interests, these protests aren't going to go anywhere. It's just a reality. You have to think. It's not like in a movie where everyone just comes out all at the same time. Like, you need organization, you need resources, you need money, you need infrastructure, you need logistics, you need to gather all of these things together. Who's going to do that? That's my question. Who is going to be the one that does that? Who's backing it? Yeah. I could see businesses, industry in Europe that is being destroyed, being behind something like that. But what capacity and what level of organization and how much time and attention have they put into that? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. We just have to wait and see. But I would not hold my breath and wait for elections or just ordinary street protests to change anything, because Western governments know the ins and outs of protests and movements, and they're very skilled at dividing people, polarizing them, distracting them, and diverting their energy in harmless directions away from their core interests. They've done it over and over again, and I have not seen really any exception to change my mind on that. And I would keep an open mind to it, but I just think it's unlikely at this.
But see, they weren't able to overthrow the Georgian government, and they tried. And I guess Georgia saw the Ukrainian example, was like, we're not allowing that to take place here. I mean, but they were more prepared. I mean, they were willing to break ankles in order to keep that protest and that mob from trying to overthrow the government at that point. But that's a rare exception. No, that's rare.
I say, and I don't know who else was helping them or how long they prepared to do that. So I would say it's not beyond the realm of possibility. But in Georgia, they didn't just all come out at the same time. There were circles of interest, political parties, businesses, industries that invested. I've seen it here in Thailand. There was a U.S.-backed color revolution, and then there was a counter color revolution organized by interests in Thailand. It was a lot of ordinary people joined it, but it wasn't like ordinary people organized it. They were part of it, and they contributed, but it was you have to have these big interests on board. So you have to identify them, and then you have to see if they're up to anything. Then you can tell maybe what direction an election or a protest might go in this country or that country.
Brian Berletic. Brian, man, we have a fantastic crowd here. You are awesome, man. And you've been doing this for a while. You've been calling it. And like you said, read the policy papers. They spell it all out. Thank you for this. Brian Berletic. He is a Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas on YouTube. Check him out. This is just a taste of Brian. He puts his shows out consistently. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. Take care.
You too. All right. Brian is fantastic. Brian is fantastic. The only one caveat that I would put on any of that conversation, and I don't even know if it's a caveat, they seem to be getting more incompetent. Like, if you think of the old days where you had coups and whatnot that take place, and if you spoke to random people in America, they would be like, what do you mean? We don't do that. We're loving life. We're freedom and justice. We believe in democracy. That's what we believe in, free enterprise, capitalism. Those are the aspects of freedom that we believe in. And then you get the Iran-Contra affair under the Gipper, and it gets publicized, like where you have these huge Senate or congressional hearings and whatnot, where Oliver North sitting there talking about this plan that came out, where we effectively, Iran was supposedly an enemy, but we were selling them weapons in order to get money for Reagan to have a war in South America against the the Sandinistas. And he effectively was paying kill squads to go and murder people in South America, basically had these wars. And this is after Congress passed the Bolin Act that told Ronald Reagan not to do that. Reagan did it anyway. And so Reagan, the Gipper, had to come out and explain to the public, hey, I didn't know anything about this, completely oblivious to all of it, but the buck stops with me. And because the buck stops with me, shit happens. And he goes away. That is one of the first scandals I remember watching as a child. And I'm sitting there like, whoa, not even fully understanding what I'm watching. Just, what is this boring thing on TV, and why is it constantly on TV? And yet, in retrospect, that was like this changeover, this going into this kind of modern era where more and more the stuff gets exposed. And so then you get, Obama's regime change war in Syria gets splashed on the pages of the New York Times. Of course, it always takes place after the person leaves office. Billions of dollars goes into the regime change war in Syria. Okay, well, that's pretty fascinating. Looks like we should have known that as it was happening. Tulsi Gabbard came out and was trying to tell the media that this was happening. But if you remember, Jake Tapper, CNN, took every opportunity to put a knife in Tulsi Gabbard, as she was pointing out. We're overthrowing governments, Jake, and we're paying jihadists to do it. And Jake Tapper was like, well, the government says it's not doing that. Okay, well, the government clearly never lies. And so Jake Tapper apparently must be right. Well, no, that wasn't the case. And again, I hate to bring up the fact that Joe Biden's body is riddled with cancer right now. But even that, when the media acted as if, oh, these are deep fakes, they're just making this up. Oh, this is not true, that Joe Biden is out of his mind. It's not just out of his mind, he's a cancer patient. And so they've lied over and over and over again. And Donald Trump, who lies as easily as he breathes, he's a habitual liar to like an extent that is very difficult to comprehend. I don't know what people thought that he was going to be telling the truth on a whole host of items. I'm not going to go after Social Security. I'm not going to go after Medicaid. I'm not going to go after social services. And to believe that as he's doing it, would be truthful about the fact that he's doing it. Oh, this is just waste, fraud, and abuse. That's all that is. Just waste, fraud, and abuse. The Republican budget just passed, by the way, through what is the committee. They plan on bringing this up this week. There's no tax on tips. That's not on it. No tax on Social Security. That's not on it. That's assuming you're either going to have Social Security after they get finished with it. He lied. He lied about negotiations with Iran, lied about negotiations with Russia, at the very least, earnest negotiations ending the war. Look, if I tell you I make a deal with you for your car, and you say, okay, I have a car to sell, and I said, you need to sell me your car for $1, or else I'm going to blow up your house. Is that really making a deal with you? Like, is that really a deal that under any circumstances you can accept? And can you even call it a deal under those terms? Well, the answer is, of course, no. Who the hell is going to make a deal like that? If you don't do it, I'm going to break your ankles. I'm going to break your knees. So you better do it or else. Who can make a deal under those terms? And are you really engaging in honest, legitimate negotiation if those are indeed your terms? Sell me your car for $1 or I'm going to break your knees. Not really. Not really. Meaning there is a long history of countries that pretended as if they were negotiating and really weren't negotiating because they put a poison pill in the thing they were negotiating about. Serbia and Austria, Austro-Hungarian Empire, when, can't think of his name, Black Hand, when they shot Ferdinand. It's Ferdinand? I'm mixing stuff up. Archduke Ferdinand, when they shot him. And Austria was like, hey, that's pretty outrageous that you murdered Archduke Ferdinand. And so we will negotiate with you. And then they come up with negotiations where Serbia says we would accept pretty much all of these, but obviously we can't accept you taking over our court system. Okay, well, obviously that was always going to be a red line. Under no circumstances is a sovereign government going to allow something like that to take place. Austria knew it was a red line, even when they put that in there. They put it in there for the sole purpose of having a war to teach Serbia a lesson. I hope you get my point. The same thing with George Bush. Hey, we're going to negotiate and we're going to send weapons inspectors and we're going to do all of this stuff. And really what you're doing is sending it there for the purpose of creating a war, not stopping a war. And as Brian points out, there's a continuity among all of these administrations, whether they're Democrat or Republican. And whether they're Democrat or Republican, that continuity seems to be consistent. And so Trump, again, this is the reason why I continuously ask my guests, do you think he's doing this in earnest? And if he is doing this in earnest, then how do you get Trump in Saudi Arabia saying that they need to stop supporting terrorists as he shakes the hand of a literal head-chopping terrorist? That's pretty astonishing. And yet, that's what you get. What did Ritter say? Well, it's America. America can do whatever it wants. Or he said, well, we're America, they're Iran. Okay, well, America just shook the hand of some head chopper while saying that Iran was supporting terrorists and is now escalating the demands to beyond the nuclear issue, beyond the 3.6 enrichment, which they were agreeing upon initially. And whoever the hell else knows whatever Donald Trump wants to add into this. My point is, all of these things seem to be done in order to prevent a deal, not to get a deal. And even with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the idea that you are a literal participant to the conflict and you are pretending as if you're a mediator is nonsense on its face. And there may be some stupid idiots in America who are in MAGA, that cult, that believe, well, Donald Trump is negotiating. How's the person who is party to the conflict pretending to be a mediator to the conflict while continuously sending weapons and arms to the key participant that is a literal proxy of ours? Donald Trump could walk. He could have walked on day one. He didn't do that. He picked up the mantle of Biden and kept going. And what he's talking about in regards to negotiations was always going to be a non-starter after Russia was burned in Minsk 1, 2, and for that matter, Istanbul agreements. So when Russia comes back and says, the deal we have on the table is basically a surrender demand. Your people, your troops, need to leave those territories and we can talk. That's what we're offering you. And if you don't do it now, in a few months, it will be 8, not 5. It would expand. And Ukraine was like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. What part of this did you miss? You lost the war. At which point does a loser of a war get to dictate terms of the peace dividend that takes place after the fact? It's bizarre. And yet, Europeans who have their head in their ass, who have this inflated sense of superiority, despite the fact their economies are collapsing, they're being deindustrialized, and they're being effectively used as a proxy of the US, they still go in this mindset of, we can still pull this thing out. Okay, you will be fed to the Russian wood chipper every bit as much as Ukraine was fed to the wood chipper. You believe we're allies. We're not allies. I live here. We're not allies. We don't look at you as allies. We look at you as vassals. When the president tells you to do something, he expects you to do it. That is not the same thing as being an ally. That is different. That is different. I want to bring in my guests. We are joined with the man himself, Mark Sleboda. Mark Sleboda is an international relations security analyst. Mark, my man, how you doing? You doing okay today?
I'm alive, Jamaro. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
I am alive also, fortunately. At least I think, who the hell knows what comes out.
Was that fortunately or unfortunately?
I said fortunately, because
Fortunately. Okay.
I think fortunately, but I don't know that's a flat fact. But Mark, we are in the midst of a third phone call between, I think it's the third one, between Trump and Putin.
Oh my God. I'm so sick of talking about this.
So we've had Istanbul agreements, or the Istanbul summit. Russia came in deep with military and effectively gave them a surrender demand. You people need to leave our areas that are part of the Russian Federation. I think 5 areas or 4 areas at this point. If you don't leave later, there will be 8. Ukraine seemed to be astonished by that, despite the fact that that's the same deal that Putin has said for the last several years. Trump hears that and it's like, well, I need to have a phone call because they're not accepting my 22-point plan. 22 points. That's 22 points. Put that to the side, right? You're not accepting my 22-point plan, so I need to now have a phone call with Putin because I, Big Papa, will be able to do something that these other people wouldn't be able to do. Just prognosticate just for a bit before even getting to the Istanbul thing. What do you think is going to take place with this phone call? It's supposed to take place at 10 a.m. Eastern today. So in the next, 2 hours and 2 hours. Anything is going to come of this that you think of, that you could think of?
Vladimir, you need to accept my deal. We need to have a ceasefire to end this bloodbath. It would be huge. It would be great for humanity. Yet, click.
Financial Times says that Putin wouldn't even accept Wickoff coming back. It was like, why?
I don't think that's quite the way it probably went down, because that's not the Kremlin style.
Yeah.
Right? If they wanted to send him, but they probably strongly sent the message that if he's going to be bringing this stuff that is in the public sphere and presenting it to us, then he might as well not come, because we're just going to say no anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that was expressed. I'm sure it was expressed in the politest terms. The Russian government has been more than patient and accommodating and far more respectful than it deserves to the Trump administration, with its diplomatic fumblings and Trump's megaphone screaming in capital letters, social media diplomacy, such as it is. Yeah. Because they would like Trump to come to a place where he gets frustrated enough and just walks away. That would be fine, right? They do not expect the U.S. to meet Russia's terms, right? I'm sure they understand that no U.S. president can politically survive accepting Russia's terms, surrendering Ukraine to Putin, Putin's puppet. I mean, all of that would be resuscitated again.
Yeah.
But they're leaving him the space to walk away gracefully. They're enduring this. We're just interested third-party mediators, right? Who are trying to bring these two warring sides together, rather than Trump just re-inherited the government, of the country that has been the proxy master for this entire conflict, going back many years. And Trump always tries to claim, "Oh, I didn't start this war. This isn't our war." At the same time, he's always proud to throw out that he was the first one to send javelins.
Yep.
While Obama was sending sheets or towels or blankets or something like that. He likes to dismiss it. I don't actually think that's true. But anyway, that he sent the javelins and they destroyed Russian tanks on the way to Kiev, and it saved Kiev, right? He tries to have it both ways. And if we're to listen to the CIA, right, what they purposefully, obviously, leaked to the New York Times, in the New York Times coverage of how the CIA effectively took control of the Kiev regime.
Yep.
Right. I'm helped bring them to power, completely rebuilt their military intelligence and intelligence from the ground up, established, was it a dozen CIA bases on the border, the Ukrainian-Russian border, from which they directed the Kiev regime's intelligence agents to do covert operations and warfare on the other side of, on the Russian side. I mean, that right there is an act of war. I mean, that would precipitate an act of war anyway. And if that was done, that had to be done during the Trump administration, right? Because he came in 2016, right? That had to have been done between the time period of 2015 and 2020, right? That's Trump's administration, right? So whether he was aware of that, or cognizantly aware of that, or just do whatever you want, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, he was technically the commander in chief. He has been responsible for everything that led all this arming and training of the Kiev regime that occurred in that time period. That was him, right? I mean, this all led up to that. He certainly bears responsibility from his first administration, and he's fully owns it again now. Mm-hmm. So Russia, has been accepting of this pose he's playing, right? In the faint hopes, and I must say extremely faint hopes, that it might lead to him, walking away from this mess at some point. That they know that he has contempt for Zelensky and for the European leaders, and he doesn't really care about Ukraine. But they also understand the onerous duties and impetus of the entire institutional and geopolitical apparatus behind the U.S. against Russia, right? I mean, they really don't expect him to succeed against that in any meaningful way. So, as they're talking, and they're willing to talk, they're going about their business of preparing for what everyone now says, from the Kiev regime to the Western media. They're talking about looming giant Russian offensives coming, with entire new armies of some 240,000 new troops being deployed onto the battlefield in the coming weeks and months. And that's perhaps why the desperation is getting to the coke snorting on a train level that it is right now among the NATO NATO countries' political elite. And I mean, what else is he going to say? You know, he's going to call up and he's going to say, why won't you accept my ceasefire? And we've been saying for more than a year, no ceasefire, right? If you want a ceasefire, these are the terms. You stop all military aid, you stop all intelligence aid, and the Kiev regime withdraws, first of all, from all of, Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. They don't really have much on Lugansk left. It's like some tree lines or something. And they also added, which is not being reported as much, that the Kiev regime must withdraw from the Russian declared border zones, the buffer zones it has created / is creating in the Kursk, in the Kharkov region and in the Sumy region on the other side of the Kursk border.
Did they? Interesting.
Yes, they did. Yeah, because they've declared those, right? You know, you invaded here, right? You have to move back, right? Because we need a buffer zone because we don't trust you, right? How many times have they, even since they were kicked out, how many times have they attempted to break in again and failed? Right. I mean, that has happened multiple times over the past few, as suicidal and insane as that is, you know, of pursuing political narrative headlines, you know, rather than any sorts of military strategy or sense, which has led to the one of their top neo-Nazi military commanders of saying, these orders are stupid. I want to resign over the past week. So they know that they keep trying to present it as it's some type of stalemate. Oh, the Russians they're stagnating, or we've seen other headlines. Oh, Russian is moving forward, but inches, but demands miles. You know, we're hearing all of this in the Western media, but everyone knows. I mean, everyone within the intelligence networks and the military must understand, you know, what's coming in the next couple of months, and you know what a dire state the Kiev regime's military is now in terms of manpower, in terms of that Biden surge of weapons and ammunition running out, of the inability of all of the NATO countries to replace it. All right, and it's not just NATO countries. Think about the headlines we've heard of where they have drawn weapons from, scraping over the last years from Israel, right? From U.S. stockpiles that were for Israel's use in Israel, South Korea, Japan, Pakistan, the international arms market, looting the new Al Qaeda Syria's military stores from everything that the Russians gave to the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad. They have looted the world over of artillery shells and ammunitions and weapons to try to keep, on top of, you know, all of NATO being devoted to this, to try to stop Russia in Ukraine. And it's not enough.
Yeah,
it hasn't been enough. Think about that. At one point, there was a point where the Kiev regime officials talked about there's not enough weapons in the world, and they're right. I mean, I don't know, maybe if China got behind it, right, and put their military production. But other than that, there's nothing. I mean, and this is still a war of attrition, right? That was actually admitted to by Sierski in the last week, I think, for the first time. That this is a war of attrition still. Russia may break out of the war of attrition later this year, but they're still in a war of attrition. And yes, right. So you've got this dog and pony show with, you know, around talks and diplomacy. You've got the reality on the battlefield, but then you've got another higher level of reality that is the military industrial complex and production. Because the real battles in a war of attrition are battles of logistics and production. Those battles are fought in the factories, or in the case of the Kiev regime, in underground drone assembly workshops, right? That is where Russia is really outclassing not just the Kiev regime, but all of NATO and all of NATO's friends and vassals around the world put together as well, with some Russian help, some help for Russia from, it must be said, from Iran and North Korea, North Korean artillery shell production, and doubtless by now other things, maybe they're making drones, as well. This sort of thing is definitely helping Russia, even more. Russia would be, I believe, outclassing all of NATO anyway, but the truth is that North Korea does have pretty significant industrial power, and the unofficial word is that Russian production engineers went to North Korea and helped them, shall we say, renovate, update, and modernize their factories to produce what Russia needed at the current level of technology and qualification, quality assurance, if you want to put it that way. So, that's, again, the diplomatic rigmarole, the battlefield, the production line, right? That's where the realities are actually being forged.
Okay, so do you think Trump is just going to walk? Or do you think he's going to be like, well, we need to, it seems that he is lumping in more with Europe along this notion of sanctions.
Yep.
And continued weapons to the degree that they can find weapons. That's what it seems.
Brandon 2.0.
Yeah, that's what it comes across.
He's just got so little other options. I mean, it was just always going to end up in this place. We talked about this right after Trump was elected. And I've said it many times, there will come a moment where Putin says "niet," and it all will come down to what Trump says. And there's been this rigmarole, and Putin has said no politely, and the Americans have accepted that and pressed forward with their stupid, Kellogg plan that somehow transfers the Russian-controlled Zaporozhye nuclear power plant to the U.S. and we reward you with 1/4 of what you've already taken, and we'll recognize that. All of this nonsense. NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine, NATO planes in the sky, and all of this nonsense that is obviously going to be completely unacceptable. And if Russia was losing, it would be a different story. Russia's not losing. Right. They've been very slow and grudging to admit this, right, in the mainstream media. But we have seen an occasional glimmer of recognition of this fact from the Trump administration. It almost seems like a strobe light. Yeah. Like the Trump administration's understanding level is a strobe light. We see it. We don't see it. We see it. We don't see it. Occasionally they seem to have some glimmering of understanding of the realities on the battlefield and beyond the battlefield. But they keep coming and shoveling this, this bull feces on Putin's plate, and he keeps saying no. So No,
but I was just going to ask, do you think
so there's going to be a phone call, and what after the phone call? Is the U.S. going to insist on a face-to-face summit meeting between Putin and Trump so that Putin can tell him no to his face? I mean, is that what it is? Because I just don't see anything else in the cards. I do not see that Trump will ever be able to say to Putin, I accept your demands, or I accept even 90% or 80% of your demands, because there's nowhere near close between them. And then he can't obviously make the Kiev regime and the EU do what they don't want to do. I mean, they're maneuvering a little bit. He says go to a meeting and so forth, but if he ordered them to effectively surrender to Russia, they're not going to do that. They can't. Right. The Kiev regime can't politically do that either, right? Zelensky doesn't have that power, I mean, it's the regime, it's the Banderites, it's you know, you want to call it the nationalist battalions that now, you know, are suffused throughout the military and the security service. I mean, do you think Budanov is going to take that? I mean,
Trump can walk. If walking is effectively forcing a surrender, it may take a few months. Hell, it may take a year, depending on how long Ukraine can, you know, whittle it out.
I just don't think he can do it.
Even then.
Yeah.
So your thing is that you expect like the Ukrainian military would literally have to collapse on the battlefield before any real political could change.
I don't actually. I see collapse is usually blown out of all proportion, right? They're going to crumble and they're going to deteriorate. But I imagine that they'll fight, you know, to Kiev and beyond, to Lvov, to, you know, to the Polish border. I don't see some type of, you know, Zelensky finally accepting the defeat of his military forces and signing papers. I don't think this conflict ends that way.
Wow. That's
I think it's long and bitter and bloody and guerrilla warfare and Cold War, you know, bordering on hot war like we've never seen before. And that's not a good ending for Russia, right? I mean, Russia would like, right, Western acceptance of the new realities, a new security architecture where they agree not to mass weapons and actively work against each other. But none of that is going to happen. I mean, that is not in the cards. They even in Trump's administration, other than possibly Trump and Witkoff, if you want to believe in that or not, you know, no one else believes in that, right? No one in Europe believes in Europe. I mean, Russophobia has almost become, you know, it's a word. Russian hatred in Europe, Russian hatred has reached like levels of anti-Semitism in the medieval era, right? I mean, that is what is going on in Europe. There's not going to be any peace with Europe. There's not going to be any type of security arrangement, not till there's some generational change, if that's possible, of the European political elite. So, I mean, where does that leave us?
It did change in America, though. And what I mean by that is
no, it didn't. Trump came.
Well, let me make my case. Let me make my case.
Changed.
I'm not saying that Donald Trump. Well, and I guess that leads to a question: do you think that Trump really came in with this? Because, as I was telling the audience, if I make a deal with you and I said, "Hey, I want to buy your car," and you said, "Okay, great, I want to sell my car," and I say, "I want to buy it for $1, and if you don't, I'm gonna break your knees." Okay, then that's not really a negotiation. That's something else. Meaning, I have already aspirations of breaking your knees. It's not about the car. It's about breaking your knees. Is that where Trump is? Like, where none of these negotiations were real?
I mean, from the Russian perspective, yeah. And I mean, in this case, it would also be the U.S. is the person that broke the last car. I mean, So, yeah, I just Trump. The Russians are both contemptuous and laughing at what passes for diplomacy from the Trump administration.
It's absurd.
It is. It's this. You're right. It's this mafia style stuff. You know. Yes, we're losing, but give me everything I'm demanding, or we'll, you know, break your knees and burn down your cousin's house. I mean, that's what it is. And Russia's like, yeah, I never really liked that cousin anyway, and you know, you can certainly try for my knees, but that's
okay.
They aren't budget. There's so many people, not only in the Western media and governments, but even a number of people within the alt media who are like, Russia's going to cut a ceasefire. Russia's going to cut a deal.
I don't know why you think that.
I mean, I will admit that there was a tinge of doubt for a long part on my side that Putin would fall back on his, you know, reflexive instinct for settling things diplomatically, but we're not there now. I mean, we're well past that. We're years past that. I mean, so much has happened in the last 3 years, or you know, even in the last decade that Putin can't go back there anymore. The Russian people. There was an article where in the New York Times, where the New York Times managed to talk to some Russian soldiers engaged in the SMO. And they're like, sure, we want this to be over, but we're not stopping until it's done. And essentially they were saying we don't want to, and we won't let Putin stop it before it's done. That is the settlement at the troop level. The brass is at an entire. This is why the Russian military brass is so involved in these diplomatic, overtures, or that they're because if there was actually going to be agreements, well, then they would be dictating, they would be informing what the realities on the ground are, and how that would be settled. But ultimately, I think that the Russian, the Stavka, the Russian brass is, we're not stopping just because the proxy master is upset that their toy is about to be broken. Right. There was a great meme. The Irish journalist who works for RT, Che Boyce.
Chess.
He posted a meme last week that I thought was particularly cutting to the point, and it's a black and white sketch of a Roman gladiator pit. And one of the gladiators is laying on the ground, defeated, holding up his hands, and the other one is with a gladius, I believe, or something of the sort, pointed and looking to the crowd, for the thumbs up, thumbs down, and the defeated gladiator yells up to the crowd, "I demand a 30-day ceasefire." That's the Russian military. That's the Russian brass's perspective.
That's their point of view. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I accept that, right? They're winning on the battlefield. I mean, it's astonishing to me that the side that is losing is demanding a surrender. It's amazing, right? What took place at the Istanbul summit? Anything? I know there was supposed to be the 1,000 people exchange, but from my understanding, Russia effectively told Ukraine, here's our surrender demand. And if you don't do it now, it's not going to be 4, it's going to be 8.
Yeah. So, so the only real, there was, I want to say three substantive things that came out. First of all, of course, the Kiev regime didn't show up for the first whole day because there was this game of musical cities and in Turkey, and Zelensky demanding a face-to-face, no talks without a ceasefire. That's out the window. Only I can talk to Putin, and I'll only talk to Putin. That's out the window. And Trump is saying, sit down, right? Send your team, right? So he had to assemble a team last minute, and sent it there. And so, yes, they agreed. And this was probably already in the works, right?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't probably, there have been prisoner of war exchanges, for most of this conflict.
Yeah.
So it is unlikely. This was, a low-hanging fruit that was probably already in the works and tossed so that they could say that something came out of this, right? So the Kiev regime is always demanding a all-for-all prisoner exchange, which is laughable because Russia has 5 to 10 times more Kiev regime POWs than the other way around. So 1,000 for 1,000, from my understanding, that is the majority. 1,000 is the majority of the Russian troops held by the Kiev regime that they have.
Well, they don't want to look bad. It looks bad if you give back 50,000 to 1,000. That just looks bad.
Yeah, I don't know about 50,000, but more
I'm
like
whatever the number is,
8 to 10, something like that, right? That's more like it. So that was agreed on. The other is they're going to meet again, right? That they haven't said a time. Supposedly will happen again in Istanbul. They agreed that each side is going to have a written list of the respective sides' demands for a ceasefire. Okay, right. We know that's not going to be met. That's still beating the same dead horse. Other than that, it was, yes, Russia, presenting those demands for a ceasefire, or a bigger picture, an end to the conflict. And yeah, so I mean, there was this thing where supposedly the Kiev regime side came out of the meeting, and the initial reports are that they demanded that they withdraw from these 4 regions, and the Kiev regime said no. And then the Russian side stood up and said, fine, next time it'll be 5 regions. Next time we talk, it'll be 5 regions. We're at this point. And Margarita Semenian says that her journalist talking to the Russian team in Istanbul had said, we didn't say that. That's not the way it happened. We didn't say 5, we said 8. Yep. Right. So, I mean, whether that's true or not, it's not either. Alexei Arestovich, right? Zelensky's former Gobelesque, mouthpiece, now in exile, sanctioned by Zelensky in New York or somewhere in the U.S. My understanding, he said the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. He's constantly doing these podcasts and interviews and a lot like this, I guess. He's
invited him to an interview.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if you do that, hats off. He's an interesting guy. You watch those videos where he predicted the Russian intervention years before it happened, and exactly how it would happen, right? When it would happen, how many, Russian group armies would be involved, and where they would come across the border and everything. He knew all of this. I mean, they were well aware of the path they were heading down, and at the time, they thought he said it was worth it to join NATO. And since then, he has said, I was wrong. NATO is not as strong as they appeared, and it's not worth it, right? So, he outright said, well, sooner it'll be 6 or 8. So, I mean, that's where they are. The other interesting report out of the meeting is, again, a discussion of, the Russian demands. And the Russian side said, we'll fight as long as it takes. This is according to Oliver Carroll, an anti-Russian writer for The Economist, that British, fiercely anti-Russian rag of record. Mm-hmm. And he said that, again, according to the Ukrainian side, that the Russians said, we'll fight as long as is necessary to complete the goals that the president has set out for the SMO, which are getting bigger, by the way. And he said, we'll fight for 1 year. We'll fight for 3 years. We'll fight for 5 years. We'll fight for 10 years. We fought Sweden for 21 years. How long can you fight? Wow. We will fight forever. That's what they said, right? Wow. According to I've got no reason to disbelieve that. So that's the Russian mentality right now. I mean, I see it here, right? I mean, I hear it on the political talk shows. I hear the people. I know people who are 40-year-old guys, white collar professionals who are signing up for the SMO.
Really?
Because they feel, there's a groundswell of patriotism, and I believe a sense of victory in Russian society right now. They feel, a lot of people, what have I done with my life? What, will I, tell my kids and my grandkids, and this, they believe, is the mission of their generation.
Wow.
That they have that feeling. We are finishing the business that our grandfathers fought for in the Great Patriotic War.
That's what I was going to say. Is this because of the history of the Great Patriotic War? Like, it's so...
there's a direct... I mean, how can there not be a direct connection when the Kiev regime is continually naming streets and erecting statues and, the military badges and of the Banderites, of Stepan Bandera, the Nazi-era World War II collaborators, right? The genocidal that committed the massacres of anyone, Poles, Jews, Russians, leftists, gypsies, anyone and everyone who didn't share their vision of a Banderite fascist Ukraine, which ultimately was Ukrainians. Primarily, they killed other Ukrainians, right? Whatever ethnicity they were, right? They were citizens of Ukraine, of the Ukrainian SSR, right? At the time. And that is, Russians see it as finishing the beast that should have been put down then. You know, the cancer, the serpent of Banderism, right? This fascist, ultra-nationalist West Ukrainian Galician ideology. And it is driving everything that's happening, you know, it was the vanguard of the Maidan, and it has suffused all through the new government over the last decade, and now it's completely suffused through the military and the intelligence services, which is not to say that not everyone, you know, adheres to it, but everyone gives it lip service because it's dangerous not to. A lot like the Nazi ideology in Germany, you know, at the time. It's the same kind of thing, that a passionate, radical, extremist ideology possessed by a minority can be forced on an entire population, and that's what's happened. You know, the whole mission, you know, of the Maidan and its Western backers was to manufacture an anti-Russian Ukrainian nation, and they succeeded. I mean, let's be honest about that. You know, that's what happened between 2014 and 2022 and today. I mean, they have made an anti-Russian Ukrainian nation. You know, they have to ban churches and the political parties and media and you know, throw people in jail and assassinate hundreds. The number has got to be in the thousands of East Ukrainians that the Ukrainian intelligence agencies have assassinated with car bombs and shootings, you know, throughout, you know, Eastern Ukraine over the last few years. It's got to be in the thousands by now. Wow. You know, that's what the toll it has taken. But it was forced, and it was forced with a wink and a nod and gifts of money and arms by the West. So, you know, where does that really leave Russia space for negotiations with these people? It doesn't. Yeah. That we had this incident in the Baltics now. I mean, this
I saw that with Estonia. Oh, that's hilarious.
So they're so frustrated that their sanctions aren't working, right? That now they're going after Russia's shadow fleet of tankers, right? Let's be clear. A shadow ship, no, it's not something from Babylon 5, right? You know, it's not some sci-fi thing. It is simply a tanker that doesn't get its insurance from London, which, while not a entire monopoly, does have certainly the largest share of maritime insurance in the world, which means they can't, I mean, because of course they don't allow Russian ships to get it anymore. Mm-hmm. So the excuse is now that they're going after the shadow fleet to check the ships for proper insurance, right? Now, the Baltic Sea is very narrow, but there is a lane of international shipping through the thing. But here's the thing, is it is so narrow that the exclusive economic zones of Estonia and Finland and other countries, European countries there, extend, you know, over that. Now, that doesn't say that they can then stop peaceful maritime shipping, but essentially that's what they're saying, right? That it gives them the right to for safety regulations, to check for insurance or something of the sort, right? It's, you know, it's rhetoric, right? Everyone knows what they're doing. So they tried, they find they're working themselves up to it, you know, like a pack of hyenas, you know, trying to goad each other into attacking a line. And I don't mean disrespect for hyenas, because they're actually amazing, very social, complicated creatures. But, you know, it's the understanding of the analogy.
Mhm.
And so Estonia finally worked themselves up to this, right, with other help. So
Yes,
they,
did. Right.
the entire, from my understanding, is the entire Estonian flotilla, which is the entire Estonian Navy, is 6 patrol ships, right? First they ordered this tanker to leave the lane of international shipping and dock in Estonian port for inspection or to check their insurance or whatever. And the captain's like, no, cut off, pound sand. And they had a Polish F-16 that was assisting them. So obviously this was a coordinated effort.
Yes.
And a Russian Su arrived like a rocket, evidently briefly violating Estonian airspace on the way out there to get there in time, and chased them off. But then another Portuguese F-16 arrived on the scene. So nothing happened, but there was on both sides starting to be a buildup of aircraft, right, however long, right? And there's going to be more provocations like this. This Baltic shipping lane is going to be another flashpoint between NATO and Russia directly, because the Baltics will always, little chihuahuas that they are, seek to provoke Russia. And especially now that Finland and Sweden have been brought into NATO, the policy people, right? The think tanks, the academics, they continually speak now of the Baltic as a NATO sea, and how they need to choke off Russia through this. And they can do that, sure, if they want a war, because that's an act of war. Right? Stopping peaceful maritime shipping in international waters is an act of war. And if you want to go down that road, well, then, Russia is ready for that. They don't want to go.
That didn't end well for them. They got freaked out and they backed off of the hot stove. Oh my God, that stove was hot.
Yeah, but again, it's this desperation. This is panic that's making them do stuff like this. And it's not the last we'll see of these. Of this and of this sort of thing. We're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, because at some point this is going to start a war.
Yeah.
You only need one mistake.
It's
right?
certainly, it is not a small possibility. Yeah.
I want to go to the battlefield for a moment. For the time I have left, to get to what has been taking place on the ground. I mean, as you pointed out earlier in the show, that there seems to be a growing sentiment that a Russian offensive is coming. I saw the media reports coming out saying, oh my God, there's going to be a Russian offensive, which, as you point out, explains a lot of the desperation coming out of NATO, either in that nonsense campaign where they nearly got bombed by a Russian fighter, or either Zelensky, as you pointed out, coked up on the train begging for a ceasefire. What has this offensive started? I guess that's the first question.
No. I mean, not. Again, it depends on what you call an offensive, right? The Russian forces, the 640,000 forces that are already involved in theater in the SMO, they're applying what I would call offensive pressure all along the contact line. They are advancing everywhere. And whereas over the last couple of months, the Kiev regime was counterattacking in multiple places and putting up some stiff resistance. They kept trying to break back into Toretsk, for instance, holding out in Chasiv Yar and a few other places. I'm not seeing anywhere now where they're offering what I would call a strong resistance. That the Russia, it's still tree lines and villages, right? That Russia rate is advancing, but those tree lines and villages are coming much faster than they were a year ago, right, or 2 years ago. So I would say the notable developments that I've seen, right? Again, Russia's advancing everywhere along the long contact line. is the buildup of forces in the Sumy region, right, of Ukraine, which is new, crossing the border from Kursk and moving into Sumy. The citadel, the center, right, with the high-rise apartment buildings that have always been used as these kind of defensive fortresses of Chasiv Yar, has been taken or all but taken by the Russians, which means they're just holding out in a few fringe suburb settlements at this point. So that has been a long battle. They put up a long, stiff fight there, but that fight looks like it's coming to a close. In Pokrovsk, in the former trade and logistics center in southwest Donbass, and in Seversk, right? The name itself means north, right? In the north of Donbass. These are the two holdouts other than the main defensive line. And Russia is moving to either put into a pinchers, or increasingly in Pokrovsk, it's actually looking like they're actually moving to surround the entire city, which is very tough to do. It's a wide area. But they're strangling. They're cutting off the supply lines. And in the south of the Pokrovsk area, Russia took a major Kiev regime fortress settlement, Bogatyr. That name itself means warrior in Russian, by the way. Bogatyr was taken after a tough, month or a couple month long fight they've been engaged in now, but Russia has conclusively taken that. The Kiev regime has still been trying to deny it, but they're not. That's not convincing now. So that's been pretty significant. Russia is also heavily bombing the citadel in Pokrovsk itself right now. So they're already preparing to storm Pokrovsk proper. Also, in the fighting north of Toretsk, in the direction of Konstantinovka, the southernmost of this last major defensive line, the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka agglomeration, right, in Donbass, in Donetsk, the last major. Russia's already moving into the Konstantinovka outskirts, right? Fighting is there.
In the making.
Plus, there is the reports. There's not a lot of video evidence, but there's near continuous reports now of Russian forces crossing the Dnieper River in small boats and setting up, beginning to set up bridgeheads on the other side of the Dnieper River, not at Kherson city itself, but along that coast there. Now, that could be just making the Kiev regime divert forces, right, to spread their forces even thin. But if the Kiev regime doesn't divert forces, well, then Russia will say, well, here's a weakness. Let's make this a real front then and push there. So that is a new development too. Russia, we had all this whole long summer last year of this suicidal attacks in Krinky and supposedly directed by the British admirals, right? This was all their game. The suicide mission on the other side. Well, now Russia is very quickly setting up shop themselves on the Kiev regime held side of the Dnieper River. There's just too many reports to deny about that. And again, the problem is the Kiev regime is simply manpower. They can't defend everywhere.
Which is the point of pressing the entire.
That's the point of pressing everywhere and the attrition strategy. Yeah.
And you pointed out that there were 200,000 more troops that are about to be brought into.
Yeah, some 240,000. Yeah, that's a third again. The size of the entire SMO.
Is there any talk about abandoning the attrition for a full-scale push, or no? It's like
that will be. I mean, you don't talk about that. If there is, again, the idea that the collapse of the Kiev regime military suddenly says we're not going to we're done, we can't fight anymore. But until there's more generalized crumbling in multiple places along the contact line, then Russia, it would lead to higher Russian casualties. Russia is quite happy with the attrition trade-off rate at this time. They're taking light casualties. That's why they're doing what they're doing, right? I mean, the Western media is full of all kinds of absolutely absurd and easily debunkable stories of Russian human wave attacks and, you know, all of this type of really pretty racist propaganda when it comes down to, right? But Russia forces have been the commanders, you know, presumably at the Putin political level, they've been insisting we minimize our casualties, and it's one of the reasons why Russians are so willing to sign up for the SMO, because they believe in it, the pay's good, and the other side is getting much the worse of this. And Russian losses are just nowhere near as high as they are continually trying to pretend and the way they are. Oh, yes, Russia's making gains, but the losses. No, not really. No, I mean, not on relative terms of this conflict, or the Russian losses are not that high for this scale of conflict, this intensity of conflict. They're not. And the reason is the strategy of attrition that Russia is using. And it's just the Western generals and military analysts, they have never understood this. They have never, or very few of them have, since the beginning of this conflict. They've never understood what's happening. They've had this unipolar moment of hubris of the West, mostly the US, with absolute air superiority and beating up on third world countries, and their talk of their Jedi art of combined arms maneuver warfare and attrition strategies are this barbaric relic of the past, only because they've near peer battle for decades, right? Yeah. And they've never understood this conflict because of that. And it's not the only reason, but it's certainly one of the reasons why the Western media has been so continually wrong about this conflict from the very beginning. From the Russians are fighting with shovels and running out of tanks and missiles and rations and everything else, and Russian troops are untrained and poorly motivated. It's all been false.
Yes, that's
it's all been either just wrong or deliberate propaganda, jingoistic lies. Take your pick.
Is it also the belief that, and this could be the last question, that behind this is Europe, that ultimately, in the same way that that thing in the Baltic could have sparked a larger war, that ultimately Europe is standing there next? I heard the speech that Putin gave where he was like, the Frenchmen want to go and fight for France. They fight the Russians for France. He's clearly thinking something. And, even Hegseth, when Hegseth was like, we need the Europeans to effectively take over this theater while we go deal with the Chinese, and then we'll be back after we deal with the Chinese to deal with the Russians. Like, when they're saying stuff like that, clearly they know that other people are listening to them. Like, nobody is stupid.
I think mostly Putin is responding to continual French and British insistence that they're going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, right? I mean, that's what they're responding to. In the Russian mind, they know that this conflict, the origins of it are the United States,
of course,
right? It was the United States who originally drove Europe to this fever ideological pitch that they are now. I mean, Merkel wasn't like this originally. She was going along, but she was more cautious and so forth, right? This is where the US has pushed Europe, right? Now, this new crop of European leaders are certainly willing to jump, ideologically full bore in, their Russian hatred and their exceptionalism to where they are, the headspace that they're in this. But and now with the Trump administration's, shall we say, internal divisions and Trump's trying to think his way out of U.S. hegemonic foreign policy, at least as it exists today, yeah, the Europeans are the driving force at the moment, at least politically. But still, there's more U.S. weapons still arriving, right, than in Ukraine than there are European weapons, right? Simply because of the long-term contracts that Biden signed. So, at one level, yes, Europe is now the political opponent for Russia to deal with, but Russia still doesn't foresee, the conflict will end as far as Russia is concerned, at least at the Polish border. Evidently, again, reported from the Western media out of the conversation in Istanbul. At the one time, one of the Ukrainians, maybe the defense minister Umarov, made a comment about, "Oh, you're going to keep going, you go to invade Poland next." And the Russian side, according to the Western reports, laughed and said, "Let's keep this talks out of the fantasy genre." So there still is. Those were the words that I'm quoting, the fantasy genre. And being, certainly in my teenage years, a big lover of the fantasy genre, I do find that particular turn of phrase rather interesting. So Russia is not thinking of invading Europe next. No.
But you really think that Donald Trump is trying to give up hegemony control?
I think he sees hegemony in its current form as too expensive and costly, and ultimately being a bad deal for the U.S. And they are trying to burden shift their way out of this. Agreed. Right? Okay. We heard Trump economic planners, right, on the White House say that tariffs were meant to fund the U.S. military and the continued use of the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency, U.S. troops around the world. They called them global public goods. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like, right? Yeah, we should all pay for the U.S. armies that repress us. That's the idea. Literally, the hubris is. Anyway, that's literally, that's not looking for a way out of hegemony.
Exactly.
That's trying to reconfigure hegemony.
Yeah,
saying that the Europeans, as the U.S.'s sidekicks or vassal states in that hegemony, need to share more of the burden with Russia. That's not giving up on hegemony. That's trying to reconfigure it. Right?
That's hilarious. Oh, that's hilarious, Mark. That is just comedy gold. Somebody else should pay for our military. It'll be
and the use of the dollar as a global reserve currency. While Trump at the same size says, and if you dream of creating any other global reserve currency in BRICS as a challenge to the dollar, I will crush BRICS. They're destroyed, right? You know what I mean? So, but you should pay for it, right?
That is great. That's just like the Brits, right? Hey, you better use our insurance. And if you don't use our insurance, you better not use anybody else.
Again and again, I hear that line, maybe it's my childhood speaking, that line from Star Wars episode 4, the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, where Princess Leia on the was it Destroyer? I guess Star Destroyer at the time. Yeah, maybe it was the Death Star. She responds to General Moff Tarkin that the more you try to tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your grasp. Yeah, that's where U.S.-led Western hegemony is right now.
Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst, best in the business from my point of view. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda. You can also find him on Substack, Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. And again, check out Mark. When does your new show come out on Substack?
It'll be up in the next week.
Check him out. Definitely check him out. Like I said, the best in the business. Mark, my man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
Thanks for having me.
Have a good one. Be safe. All right. As I said, best in the business, best analysis in the business. There are conversations I had with Mark like 2 years ago that are coming to fruition now. He was right about Trump. And no, that was maybe a year ago. effectively saying, how is the US president going to be able to accept the terms that Russia is going to put down? Well, here we are. How is the US president going to accept the terms? And I got to be honest, there was a kernel of me that was optimistic. My thing was like, okay, he's going to end the war. He says he's going to end the war. Let's see what he does. Let's see what he does. And I even decided, I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to get an apartment. I'm going to do Airbnbs for a couple of months to see what happens. Maybe something comes of this. And then when he put down that first plan, it was like, okay, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. Like, if this is where you're starting, this is functionally a dead letter. I think I even called that video dead letter because of how ludicrous what he was asking for actually was. It was completely nonsense. And so he's going to have a conversation with Putin, and Putin is going to tell him no. And then what? That's the question. Is he going to walk? Is he going to side with Europe past sanctions? We will find out. I want to bring in my guest, though. Let's have a little domestic news. People need to, as I say, eat their peas. We are joined with Sabrina Salvati, or commonly known as Sabby Sabs. She is a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster, member of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, a Black-led multicultural network co-op of everyday people, activists, and allies focused on empowering communities through education, organization, and direct action. Sabrina, welcome to the show. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Jamal.
Thank you for joining me. I think we have to get first story. There's no way around it. And I want to get your take on this. And it is somebody who let the cat out the bag in 2022. I just let him play it out, say it himself.
And because it was a 4-lane highway that was accessible, my mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening? You had to put on your windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why can't, for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation. And because
now, they called this a gaffe. They said that's a gaffe. That's totally a gaffe. The issue I have with them calling that a gaffe is, A, his body is riddled with cancer. There's that. 2, he continues coherently as he makes that statement. That's why I and many other people in Delaware have cancer. Delaware has such a highest cancer rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a weird gaffe. He didn't stutter. He didn't alter his language. And I know people are looking back at this now thinking to themselves, okay, well, how long did Joe Biden have cancer? What did they know, and when did they know it? And this is somewhat of a big deal, right? I mean, well, for one, before people issue too many sympathies of Joe Biden, I want to show this real quick. Just Israeli attacks render last Gaza hospital for cancer treatment inoperable. I call it ironic. My mom is probably cringing. Listen to me say this, but it is what it is. My sympathies are not necessarily, oh, you can't see it. My sympathies are not necessarily there for Joe Biden on this. I will reserve my sympathies for the people who are living in the world that Joe Biden helped create with the 70% of the money that he was given to a genocide, with the diplomatic support he was given to covering for that genocide, knowing full well that he was starving. The starvation, by the way, didn't just start. The starvation goes all the way back, even in the Joe Biden administration, where you had people who resigned because Joe Biden, Blinken, Sullivan changed the report that was coming out saying, yes, they are actually starving the Palestinian population, and then trying to con the American public saying, hey, we're working hard to get a deal, which, again, was also a lie, and outed, by the way, by Israeli media, who pointed out that at no point Israel was shocked. They said, thank God we had Joe Biden as our president, or Joe Biden as president during that time, because, we were shocked that he let us get away with all of this without putting any pressure on us. Right here.
Yep.
Right here. This right here. Right here. I don't want people to think I'm making this up. This is, legitimately what took place. Biden officials admit they never pressured Israel for the ceasefire, as Israel leaders boast of playing Washington. They said, thank God Joe Biden was president at the time because he never pressured us for anything. So again, bear me, I don't know where you fall on this, so I'm not going to put this on you. I would say this purely for myself. Spare me your sympathies. In this case, the man literally presided over genocide for over a year, if not more, before handing this off to Donald Trump, who's also presiding over a genocide. So, sympathy for Hitler. And no, I'm not calling him Hitler, but I'm just making the point. Does people care that Hitler had gas? Or if Hitler had cancer, or if Hitler had, a stump toe? My feelings aren't there for that.
Yeah.
That's a hell of an intro. I'm sorry. There's cover-up associated with this that people are talking about, though. And give me your take on all of it.
Yeah. So I think that what people have to remember is that the president of the United States has a physical every year. There is a doctor that is assigned to the president of the United States. So you mean to tell me that all those years that Biden was in office, they didn't catch that? They didn't catch that the cancer, the diagnosis, because at this point it is aggressive, and they said that it's made its way to the bone. So it's been there. Yeah. So I just find that kind of hard to believe. And then two, I want to remind everybody that Joe Biden was the one that said that if Medicare for All bill came across his desk, he would veto it. Right? So when this announcement happened yesterday, and I covered this live yesterday, I immediately thought about all the people that I know that have had a cancer diagnosis that couldn't afford the treatment and couldn't afford to have the best doctors. Joe Biden has the best healthcare, the best resources to be able to try to find a way to get this under control or even just to treat it. There are a lot of people in this country that go into medical debt, that go into bankruptcy because they can't afford cancer treatments. And that's even after insurance is paid. I know people that have been on chemo, and even after the insurance payments, they still had to pay $1,600 a week just to try to survive. So I don't have this sympathy for Joe Biden. I don't have this sympathy for people. They have the resources, they have the means to get the best healthcare possible, and they have a chance. And for him to say that he basically didn't want everybody to have healthcare, didn't even expand Obamacare, which is what he ran on. No, I'm thinking about all the people that can't afford it, all the people that can't afford treatment. So that's one thing. Two, to your point about Gaza, this guy spent over a year killing all these kids in Gaza. And you have people like Simone Sanders on Twitter right now saying Joe Biden is a fine man. A fine man? Does a fine man co-write the crime bill that predominantly targets Black men, taking Black men out of the home, fueling the prison industrial complex? Does a fine man do that? Does a fine man sit up there and continue to kill these kids? Even after and lie to the American people and say that they're working on it. They were never working on this. That was a lie. They were never working on a ceasefire. Does a fine man do that? Does a fine man, don't forget, Tara Reid, till this day, still accuses Joe Biden of sexual assault. Does a fine man treat a staffer that way, treat a woman that way? Does a fine man say that he doesn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle? No, because you see, the Joe Biden that I remember was an asshole. Pardon my language. That's the Joe Biden I remember. The Joe Biden I remember was the guy who stood on the Senate floor and said he didn't care what environment someone grew up in. He wanted them off the street. That's the Joe Biden that I know. The Joe Biden that I'm familiar with was friends with racist Strom Thurmond and Byrd, all these politicians that actively created laws to keep Black people where they were and to prevent any type of progress institutionally for Black people in this country. That is the Joe Biden that I am familiar with. And that is not a fine man. So you have Simone Sanders, Pierce Morgan, all these people all of a sudden want to kiss up and all this kind of stuff and say you should be happy about him. Nina Turner is on Twitter right now saying, "Oh, sympathy," and all this. All these people who still want to be a part of the club, because that's really what this is about. So I don't have that type of sympathy for Joe Biden. I kind of see this as karma.
I was going to name it ironic, Joe Biden's cancer, but it didn't fit in the bio. It only allowed you 100 characters, and ironic would have been too long to fit into it, because it is ironic. I mean, like the notion that within the same day that it breaks, that because what people, the big ticket items that people see are hospital attack in Gaza, bomb strike in Gaza, people under the rubble in Gaza. What you don't see are the cases of people with cancer, kidney failure, liver disease that also need to be treated. When I was in Bethlehem, I ran into this Belgian Palestinian woman, and she was talking about basically working in a maternity ward. And she wanted to take me through some of the parts of basically the West Bank, Bethlehem. And it is astonishing, like the level of poverty that they're living under. And that is not having bombardments. Okay, now add in bombardments. That person with a baby, that person with cancer, that person that needs dialysis. What happens to those people? Like under this level of attacks and this level of bombardment. And when you add to that, Joe Biden paid for 70% of it. Oh, that's astonishing. And then lied to the American public saying, hey, we're doing everything we can to stop Israel from doing this. Okay, no, you're not. You're lying. Not only are you lying, you're paying for it. You're giving diplomatic support to them doing that. You're going to the UN, fighting in the UN Security Council to prevent any level of accountability for it. And even when you are pressed into passing something from the UN Security Council, Blinken comes out and says, this is non-binding. Okay, well, that's shocking to the UN Security Council, considering they don't pass non-binding resolutions in that way. Meaning we covered under the Biden administration constantly over and over and over again. And so, yeah, these people need to spare me the stuff of now that he's ill, now that he's sick. Oh, we need to send our prayers to Joe Biden. I think you're right. I think God got involved. I go beyond karma. I say God got involved on something like this. I have no feelings for this, no sympathy for this. I have no empathy for this at all. And look, I get it. When I drop dead, you're going to have somebody from Ukraine dancing on my grave. God bless them, right? I'm accountable to my own conscience in this. He has not been living to the betterment of humanity, let alone other people who are in a similar situation that he is currently in. And so, yeah, I can't even strain myself to pretend as if I have sympathies for this. Yes, I'm the guy who goes to a funeral in shock that people said good things about people at a funeral when they were assholes their entire life. I'm that guy. I was shocked when they were saying that stuff about my grandfather. I was like, who the hell are they talking about? Is this the same person? I cried for my grandfather and was still shocked that they were saying that stuff at the funeral about him. If I were somebody who I love, I felt that way. You can imagine what I think about Joe Biden right now. So
I feel like this was known. They knew about this. I don't think that this is just something that was discovered. Here's what I think the plan was. I think the plan was to keep Biden in the race, or at least that's what Biden wanted, to stay in the race, right? And have him get reelected, which I don't think would have happened, but this is what I think they were thinking. Have him win reelection, and then at some point during his second term, announce that he is diagnosed, and that's how Kamala Harris becomes president. And that's how the Democrats get the first Black woman, president.
Agreed.
I really do feel like that was the plan. I feel like all these people, you mean to tell me his wife didn't know? Like it just.
I thought that before even the cancer diagnosis. I kept saying they didn't believe Kamala could win. They kept saying Kamala couldn't win over the course of the time. They was like, we don't believe she could win. Her polling isn't great. Her polling isn't great. And then, I'm sorry. I interrupt. I'm sorry. Please.
Yeah, they were going to hand it to her. That was going to be in fact, this was already stated a couple of years ago there was a gentleman, he was predicting this. He said that the first female president won't become president by an electoral win, that they will be the vice president and the current president would resign, and that's how they would become president. Yeah, I think that's the path they have. They wanted to hand it to her because they knew she couldn't win.
Yeah.
So it was just, I really think that was their plan. But I got to tell you, people out on the street are not too happy with the Democratic Party. And I'm talking about people that are loyal Democrats. They are upset that the Democrats are not fighting back against Donald Trump. They are upset that Chuck Schumer caved on that bill, that GOP bill. And they're also upset about this Biden situation because what they're saying is they feel like the Democratic Party has been lying to them. They don't know what this party is. And I'm like, oh, you see it now, right? So they're starting to see that the Democratic Party can't be trusted. And so that's part of the reason why the Democratic Party approval rating is so low, even though Trump has been in office since January. So it's been a couple of months now. That's part of the reason. People are feeling like they can't trust the Democratic Party. And a lot of it has to do with this whole Biden cover-up thing, the handing it over, all the passing things over to Kamala, not having a primary. They feel like they're being lied to. And that's, the Democratic Party is dead. Is dead.
By the way, they are being lied to. I mean, you would have to have the worst White House doctor ever to not be able to say, "Hey, I think you have cancer." How do you miss that? You don't do a PSA test. You don't do, I don't know, an X-ray. Like, how did they find the cancer this time around?
Not to mention, prostate exam is standard at a certain age.
Exactly.
Like, it's just so no.
I just don't buy it. I don't buy the premise. I don't buy the premise at all. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think they knew they were keeping it under wraps, just like they knew Joe Biden was out of his mind and they kept it under wraps, where they kept it insulated. And you got media lying to the American public. Oh, no, these are deep fakes. These are deep fakes. Look, there may be some media who just believe anything the White House said. Well, the White House said this is not the case. Oh, well, this is not the case because the White House said it. But I can't believe that all of them are this brain dead, where they're like, well, Joe Biden is sharp as a tack when we're in our meetings. And then they're taking this approach of, well, we just need to move forward and deal with what Donald Trump is doing. It's like, no, dude, no. I wish if a person gets arrested, I would imagine the guy who murdered somebody would love to say, hey, we just need to move forward and not look back on the crime that I committed back then. Because the problem is Donald Trump potentially is in office as a direct result of what they did, whether it's lying about Joe Biden's mental health or lying about the fact that he had cancer. And both of those things are just massive effort cover-ups, either way you look at it. And now you move forward where they put out the Hera tape that they didn't want to put out for the exact reason that he was clearly out of his mind, everything that Robert Hur said in his own testimony that they attacked him for, by the way. And now they're stuck with this thing of, okay, people know we lied about Joe Biden's mental health, and they know that on some level, some people had to know about his physical malady, that his body was riddled with cancer. We're stuck with both of those. What do we do with that? We need to look forward. That's what we need to do, not look back. Okay, good luck with that. Good luck with that.
I think people have to realize the Democratic Party is not a opposition party to the Republican Party. It used to be. A long time ago, the Democratic Party was the party of the working class. That is not the case. That hasn't been the case my entire life. So I just want to be clear about that. So it's been a long time since they were like champion working class people, and they were pushing for, I would say, populist economic like policies. Mm-hmm. But that ship sailed. The Democratic Party has become the party of Goldman Sachs. And like I said, it's been that way my entire life. The problem that you have, and when you see what's happening with David Hogg and the DNC and all those types of things, it's not surprising, right? Because the problem that you have is that when you have an
audience may not know about the David Hogg thing. Go into that just a little bit. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just give them a heads up on what you're referring to?
Yes. So David Hogg was elected as vice chair of the DNC, and his mission has been to remove these incumbents in Congress, the ones that have been there forever that are not doing anything. He wants to give younger people more of a voice. He wants the Democratic Party to fight. And David Hogg is not, like a leftist per se. That's the thing. Like, he's, I would say maybe like a left moderate, but he's not progressive in that sense, but he does feel like things need to change. He said the Democratic Party are losing young men because of some of the policies that they have and the way that they're going. And he's right about these things, right? But they decided that they are going to try to find a way to remove him from that position, even though he was elected for that position, because they don't like the fact that he's trying to reform the Democratic Party. Now, I just want to remind everybody, after 2016, there was a DNC fraud lawsuit. Now, I interviewed the Becks, who were the lawyers that brought this lawsuit forward, along with Nico House. The lawsuit basically claimed that the DNC cheated Bernie Sanders and handed the nomination over to Hillary Clinton, which is true. Let me explain to you what the DNC argued in court. So the attorney for the DNC was Bruce Spiva. Bruce is off doing other things now. But what they argued is that the DNC is a corporation and that it's a private entity, and that the DNC can decide who they want the nominee to be. They specifically stated that just because you voted for someone in a Democratic primary, that does not mean that they are going to be the nominee. The DNC makes the final decision. They argued this in court. The federal judge, ruled that the DNC does not have to follow their own charter. Like, this is very clear. People have to understand that it's not about who you vote for in the Democratic primary. The DNC is the final, say so. That's why they were able to, even though Bernie would win like every county in West Virginia 2016, they were able to give West Virginia to Hillary. It wasn't just West Virginia. There were multiple states that Bernie won and they gave to Hillary Clinton. That's why legally they were able to do that, because it is a corporation. So when you go out and you vote in the Democratic primary, you say, I'm voting for a said person, and this person got this many votes and they're going to be the nominee. No, the DNC decides who they want the nominee to be. What that means is that there is no reforming the Democratic Party. You see what they're doing. They're trying to remove David Hogg. And by the way, the excuse that they're using is that there's no gender balance because the chair of the DNC is a male and the vice chair is a male. So it's not gender inclusive. And that's what they're using as an example to get rid of them, right? So when you see Bernie and AOC doing this oligarch tour, it's nice, but Bernie and AOC are not true opposition. The reason why they're not true opposition is because they've made it very clear to you that it all said and done, they're not trying to start a third party. They're not going to break from the Democratic Party. They're trying to basically fight back against Donald Trump. They're not trying to fight back against the corporatists and the corruption that is in the Democratic Party, because at the end of the day, they tell you to vote for said politician who is corporate and corrupt. Their job is to take left populist energy and to keep it in the Democratic Party, to prevent the expansion of a third party, to prevent an economic populist movement in the country. That is their job. Now, that may not have been AOC's plan when she first went in. I think she really did want to fight and she tried to, and then she had a talking to, and then everything changed. This is why you don't see Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman there anymore. They get rid of the people who don't fall in line. So when David Hogg announced that he had this plan to basically oust these incumbents and bring in fresh, young energy that was willing to fight, I said he has two options. He's either going to have to get in line or they're going to get rid of him. And now you see what's happening. They're trying to get rid of him. So the Democratic Party is not an oppositional party to the Republican Party because they both respond to corporate interests. They both back and support the military industrial complex, and they are both against the working class. And we have to change our language. It's not enough to say the Democratic Party doesn't fight for the working class anymore. You have to start saying the Democratic Party is against the working class. When you saw during a pandemic, and the best that they could do was the American Rescue Plan, the child tax credit that they ended abruptly, which was supposed to go on longer, that is not in the benefit of the working class. So what you have is a Democratic Party that is putting a Band-Aid on a wound. You have a Republican Party that is taking the Band-Aid off the wound, but neither party is healing the wound. And that's what people have to fully grasp. Both parties exist to support corporate interests, and both parties are there to make sure that nothing breaks this system. This is why third parties have such a hard time. They sue them off the ballot. The Democratic Party actively sues the Green Party to kick them off the ballot, so they end up spending most of their money in these lawsuits, right? And legal fees. Neither one of them want to break the system. So both parties are there to make sure that the system maintains the status quo, that there is no change. So everyone say it with me. The Democratic Party is not an oppositional party to the Republican Party. They need each other to exist. The Democrats need the Republicans need the Democrats, and they feed off of each other. So I think until people fully understand that that's why the system is the way it is, and that's why there's no breaking the system. Anytime you have a party that wasn't willing to withhold the weapons to Israel, that wasn't willing to actually call for a ceasefire and push the end of this, what happens is the pendulum swings in the other direction. So there were people who were supporting the Democrats that said, F this, I'm going to take my chances with Donald Trump. There were people like myself that voted third party, right? Or voted for independence. But the reality is a lot of people stayed home. 6 million people that voted for Joe Biden stayed home in 2024. So the Democratic Party is dead. They either can choose to rebrand and actually become the party of the working class again, but that's not going to happen because they're too captured by corporate interests and corporate money and lobby interests. And everybody keeps mentioning AIPAC. You need to know that Kufi is even more corrupt than AIPAC. There are more lobby interests happening around Kufi. This is the one that isn't mentioned as much. So it's not just AIPAC. There's a lot of lobby interest groups in there that are controlling those politicians, and that's why they don't fight for you. In my opinion, all of them need to go. The whole damn house needs to be rebuilt.
Two things. I remember watching a video where a Democrat went to somebody's house, like she was going around and said, hey, I saw that you voted for the Green Pack. Would you like to change your vote? They were doing stuff like that. And the guy was like, why are you on my yard? Like, why are you here? Like, are you seriously here asking me to remove my name from this list for this particular third party? It's like, get the F off my yard. The other part, just to be very clear, if I remember correctly, they said we can lie, cheat, and steal in a smoke-filled room. We're a corporation. We can do what we want, which is true, by the way. They're a corporation. They don't need to have primaries. They can choose whoever they want. It's almost like a company choosing a janitor or a bus driver. I like to compare it to a bus driver. It's like, all right, we need a company. The company is going to drive our buses for the schools, and that's what we need. And one day you get this company who has this slate of bus drivers, and another day you get another company that has another slate of bus drivers. I don't need your opinion on it. I get your opinion on it because you may not vote for the guy who I choose to run if I don't get your vote for it. But all things being equal, we have the veto power where we can say we don't like that guy, so we're just going to get rid of that guy. And we're going to dress it up as if it's a choice. We're going to dress it up as if it's a contest. We're going to do all that stuff. We're going to give the accoutrements of a democratic process. But at the end of the day, if we don't like that guy, we're not going to put that guy in. David Hogg's finding that out the hard way. He was vice chair in the Democratic, the DNC, and they coming up with this nonsense. I don't even know what you call it. It's so shameless. Where they're like, yeah, we got to get rid of that guy now. And we're coming up with some rationale in order to get rid of him. This is astonishing. Like, it's so blatant. Usually you try to be more sinister.
And I just want to add, everybody, all of the so-called independent media, that support Democratic Party, they all know what I'm telling you. This is not news. They all know about the DNC fraud lawsuit
of the world. That's right.
They all know, but they have built an audience around fighting in the Democratic Party. And now it's like, if they were to tell you what I just told you, then the viewers would say, well, what's the point? What's the point in even trying to fight in the Democratic Party? Then they have to come up with another project. You see what I mean? So people have to understand, some people are not telling you about this because they have audience capture and they don't want to push, because the reality is, people are going to ask, what do you do next? So what I tell people is focus on organizing in your community, do mutual aid, fight on the local level. That's where you're going to have more success. Run ballot measures. If you live in a ballot initiative state, start running these ballot measures. By the way, a lot of these progressive policies that we wanted passed on the national level, guess where they're passing? In the states. If you pay attention to the rulings from the Supreme Courts, notice they've been pushing a lot of things back to the states. This is where a lot of the fight is really going to happen. So if you live in a BI state, start running those ballot measures. You want to increase the minimum wage, want a ballot measure for that. These things are passing in red states. These things are passed in states like Missouri, Nebraska, even some of the abortion initiatives have passed in red states to protect a woman's right to choose. So this is, they're not going to tell you that though, because if they tell you that, that means they got to actually do some work. That means they have to actually get up out of their seat and do some organizing. That means they have to lead people to do those things, and they don't want to do it because it's more profitable to be pro-Democrat or to be pro-Republican. And that's what everybody has to understand. So I say, do what you can do locally. I do mutual aid workshops. We did one last month. We're going to do another one in June. And I announced those via my newsletter. So if you're interested in doing mutual aid, you can come to one of the workshops where I break down how to get started, how to do it. I really want more people doing mutual aid, not just, it's not just those of us at RBN. There are a lot of mutual aid organizations in the United States. And I think a lot of times people just don't know they're there. But that's one of the ways to get involved. If you do want to do electoral politics, I would say, again, focus on local. Focus on how many people know who their city councilors are, because you'd be surprised. A lot of people don't know. And that's important because the city council controls the budget. Yeah. So when you want to know why things are increasing in your city, the prices are increasing here and why these zoning laws are changing, et cetera, that's city council. And then the mayor signs it. So I know people that are running for city council. They said I've kind of encouraged them to get involved locally. So they're running for city council. You can run as independent, different things. Greens and independents have a better chance winning on the local level. And they have some of those seats that I just mentioned to you. So I would say get started there. Organize with people in your community. If you don't want to start something new, some of these organizations already exist. Look on Google, look in your area to see what organizations are already there that are doing community activism and community outreach. And that's how we're going to build a better world. You have to build dual power. The reason why things aren't working the way we've been doing it is because we're not building dual power. We're trying to elect said person, and then we're hoping that they fulfill the promises that they made. That hasn't been working out, has it?
Not so much. No. I think with the Democratic adjacent networks, I think part of it is audience capture. I think the other part of it is their brand is the party. And what are they without the party? Like think of Young Turks as a really good example, where Cenk changes, just not even significantly. I think he takes like one or two, like a position on trans or something, and his audience eats him alive. And you even have members of his own TYT thing start eating him alive. And then all of these other Democratic adjacent networks are like, oh my God, I can't believe that you changed. You need to like, it was weird, like the degree of hate. But I think all of them have that. What's wrong?
Well, it's interesting because when I spoke to, when he was on my show recently, I spoke to him and I told him, like, I was like, this is a waste of time.
Yeah.
Like that basically that like now he's trying to do like a Justice Democrats 2.0, but it's a populist movement to get these candidates and all this. And I was just like, you should be, and I said it to him. I said, for those of us who have been organizing for years, like shows like TYT, shows like Majority Report, those shows should be sharing that information to their audience. And I said, you guys have not. When we were organizing for the marches for Medicare for All, you guys had nothing to do with it, didn't want anything to do with it. When people organized for Force the Vote, you were heavily against that, vehemently came out heavily against it. So the whole thing about people need to organize, people have been organizing for years. The problem is the gatekeepers in, I would say even quote unquote, independent media are not sharing that information with their audience. And they're the ones that have the most viewers. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like me and Jamal do, I think we're doing really well. But the reality is there's a big difference between us and a channel that has 6 million subscribers.
Yeah.
So you can't complain about people not organizing when people are organizing and they reached out to you and you wouldn't allow said organizers to come on and share that message. Yeah. So that's a big part of the thing. Like this whole Justice Democrats 2.0, it's a waste of time. People are wasting their money, donating money to these politicians. You should be donating your money to mutual aid. Like don't donate your money to food banks. Donate your money to things like that. Like you want to help right now. There's a fundraiser happening for Fred Hampton House in Chicago that RBN, that Rome and all my comrades at RBN are doing. Donate to that. Rome's like doubling up on diapers to give diapers and food and things to family members. Donate to that. Yeah. Right? Don't donate to these people. It made me, it really like, it made me like ill seeing people like exclaim, yay, AOC raised over $9 million. Why are we excited about that? Why aren't we raising $9 million to enrich these communities? Why aren't we putting $9 million in Detroit? This is the problem. And meanwhile, these neighborhoods continue to crumble. People continue to have increased rates of homelessness and poverty. All the money that we sat and we donated to Bernie Sanders, think about what we could have done with that money. We could have built clinics in neighborhoods that don't have clinics. We could have done so much more. And that's what bothers me. So even if you see me interview people who are running, you never hear me say donate to them. Mm-hmm. Like the money is being put in the wrong places. And that really, it irks me. And it makes me sick to my stomach when I see all the money that went to Bernie Sanders and AOC for them to what? Just tell you to capitulate to the Democratic Party establishment.
So much money, billions. He was outraising Hillary Clinton, if you remember. Yep. Like he was putting in more money in the primaries than Hillary Clinton was putting on because he was getting small dollar donations, $2, $3, $9, $20. Speaking of our political space, we talked about this a little bit, but I know you don't think, well, and I'll just ask you, the Republican bill that they're putting out, that they're going through budget reconciliation for. So apparently it's passed the committee that it was in. It passed by what, one vote, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, one vote. 4 people abstain, 17-16. And then you get Johnson coming out saying he hopes to put it for a floor vote by Thursday. I imagine he needs to get his caucus online or his party online for it because they're going to gut Medicaid by like, nearly $1 trillion, $800 billion. Trump is saying, well, that's just waste, fraud, and abuse that we're taking out of Medicaid. And of course, he's going to take that money and give himself and his other cronies a massive effing tax cut to the tune of like $5 trillion. They're talking about putting like $5 trillion on the debt. That's a debt that's already at 36 trillion that we're packing on like 2 trillion each year. That they're going to put another 5 trillion on just to pass out to themselves for all intents and purposes. The reason that our budget rating was cut was because it was like, all right, you guys have no capacity. A, we don't think you're going to pay that back. B, your government is dysfunctional. You have no capacity to even do anything to try to pay that much money back. You don't have the ability to raise taxes, at least not in any real terms. And not just raise taxes, you're cutting them further, which is effectively putting more money on the debt deficit, I should say. Do you think that's going to pass? I guess let me start with that first.
I don't know.
I'm going to say yes. I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes, that bill is going to pass. It's a cash grab.
I was going to say it's what Trump wants, so most likely. Like this is very sad. They are taking money from the poor and giving it to the rich. They are the reverse Robin Hood.
Yes.
Reverse
the
Robin
man on the planet.
Yeah.
Is destroying Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare in order to save what, $150 billion? And they're about to put $5 trillion on the debt. Think about that. Like, people need to really put that in context. He's firing workers, making a minimum wage, and doing this ostensibly for $150 billion when they're literally about to, 20 times that much or some insane amount? I'm not going to do math on the fly because it's always a fool's errand.
I mean,
it's insane.
I'm just thinking about all the seniors that might run into an issue, the seniors that are residents at a long-term care facility. I used to work at a skilled nursing facility. That was my first job out of college. And I worked in accounts receivable. And so that's why I'm very familiar with how health insurance companies pay and private pay and Medicaid and all that type of jazz. But I'm thinking about all the people that are a skilled nursing facility and they are on Medicaid. And people have to understand too, like for those particular patients that like, in order for them to even have qualified for Medicaid, this is after they have exhausted all of their funds.
Yep.
So Medicaid is that last step, right? And like they are really taking from the poor to give to the rich.
Yeah.
And how do we get here? We get here by the Democrats not being a real opposition party. That's how you get back to a Donald Trump. That's how you get back to, and people really just need to see the level of corporate greed. This is why you hear me complain about billionaires. This is why you hear me complain about all these rich people who are getting all these tax breaks, but yet they're penalizing those who are poor. And I just don't understand how everybody can go along with that.
My grandmother, when she got ill and she was on Medicaid, and at that point you realize, okay, she needs help. She needs a nurse in the house. And you realize, okay, well, how much does this cost? And then Medicaid will say, okay, well, we'll give you X amount. It's a pittance in comparison to the amount of the cost. And so then it's like, okay, well, now we need to figure out how we're going to get the money in order to pay for this. So that becomes a family issue. Or you're going to have your family exhaust themselves like my mom did, just exhaust herself trying to take care of somebody who really should have a nurse in the home around the clock. But again, you have to pay that out of pocket. Whereas you would think that in a society that is rich as this country is, I mean, Elon Musk is going to be the world's first trillionaire, but somehow and look, I get it, right? Look, I always say they're sociopaths. I stay with that. And I say sociopaths, and I know people try to correct me. No, you can't correct me on this. It's a societal thing where you get accustomed to functioning in a particular system where in your mind, the system says this is the way you should act and this is the way you should behave. In which case they behave in the way the system tells them. When you have people putting all of this money down your G-string, do you think Mike Johnson is really looking out for his constituents when he's doing this? No, he's looking out for the people who are putting all of this money in his pocket. You have all of these millionaires and billionaires who are putting money in Mike Johnson's pocket. Mike Johnson says, all right, they want me to do this and I need to go out and sell it. And that's what I'm gonna do. And I would go further. Even if the American public is pissed off, you're only putting in Democrats who also are paid by the exact same people. When Obama got in office and Obama was running with this what is it? The top 1% stuff, the language that he effectively stole from Occupy Wall Street. The majority of the people who Obama put into his administration were picked by Citigroup.
Yep.
Okay, so in one sense, he croons, he plays basketball, and he's bought by Citigroup, while all of a sudden saying the top 1% as if he's part of this Occupy Wall Street movement. And by the way, gutting Black home ownership when the housing crashes happen. So it's like, you get it on both ends. Like there's no way out of that box in regards to electoral politics, in the sense of, okay, if you're putting in a Democratic Party, a Republican Party. And you know, the sad part about it, the thing that I really hoped is that Trump would smash the Democratic Party to pieces. I mean, like to pieces, like where pieces of glass just sprawl across the floor. Where on some level, no, I'm being serious. I am very punitive after Sanders' run because of how flagrant that cheating was, right? I mean, granted, Sanders was a sheepdog, fair enough. But there's still something to be said about, initially, there was this belief, at the very least, with me growing up, I'll say it this way, that, all right, third way Democrats have taken more of the leadership position, and you have the left. The left has nowhere else to go, so the left backs third way Democrats. However, if the left gets into somewhat of a leadership position where they seem they're clearly the strongest thing moving, that the third way would take the position of the left and say, okay, well, we'll back you. Okay, that was fundamentally destroyed during the Sanders era, where Chris Matthews comes out and says, maybe it's better to let Donald Trump win as opposed to let Sanders take it for a generation. Okay, that's honest. That's honest. I accept that. So don't come to me, Sam Cedar, and some of these other Democratic adjacent people saying, hey, the left should back. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Door shuts, right? Phone hangs up. They've already said the quiet part out loud in regards to the way they look at electoral politics. It's not about being fair. It's not about being honest or ethical or moral, any of those things. We could choose a candidate in the backfield, smoke-filled room if we need to. That is the honest part about it. That's the honest about international politics too, by the way. It's just the way it works. It's your power. And the way that they look at it, we have the power to do a cash grab. Nobody's going to stop us from doing a cash grab. Even if some of these Republicans get taken out because they get pissed off at the Medicaid, Medicare stuff, you're putting in Democrats who are also paid by the same people who are not going to expand Social Security and Medicare. They're not going to increase the minimum wage. They're not going to, pass a childhood tax credit in any sense of the word that's going to last. That's not what they believe in. That's not what they think. And so what if you do a cash grab now? So what? It's going to teeter-totter back and forth anyway, because nothing is fundamentally going to change in a public who's looking for something different. It's never going to find that difference, and they're going to get had by one party or the next. That's cynical. I'm sorry. But that seems to be the way that it actually functions. And so I'm not shocked that these guys are like, if we can get $5 trillion, we're going to take $5 trillion. What are they going to do about it? That's dark, but it seems to be true. I don't know how it's not true.
It's a sad state of affairs where we are heading as a country. And I don't know if everyone watches Professor Richard Wolff's economic update, but he's been warning about this for quite some time, like the direction that we're going in. And we just have to remember there's more of us than there are the billionaires. There's way more of us. And we are like the 99%. And I think that's why, like, I don't know. I think we could be closer towards a revolution than I realize. Like, I think it's going to take like total collapse though, Jamal. I think it's going to take like total like economic collapse for people to say, F this, F the parties. I'm out to fight back against the rich people,
My assumption is collapse. I think a system goes until it can't go anymore, until all the productive energies of the system run dry. I think it's a mechanical process. I don't even think it's a human process. I think it's mechanical. It just goes until it can't go. When it can't go anymore, something comes next. Jack Fresco, and I'll let you go because we have gone well beyond our time. Jack Fresco has this thing called the Venus Project. And he points out, look, instead of using a system that deals with scarcity, where it's enforced scarcity, it's not because you need to have scarcity. I mean, you have technology, you can build all sorts of stuff. And you can build that stuff considering the amount of wealth that's in the world. Okay, what if that wealth is applied to getting rid of poverty? I mean, for God's sake, look at China. We spend all of the time screaming at China when the reality of it is our oligarchs just sent our businesses to China and the Philippines and other countries and just took the money for themselves and bought boats, yachts, cars. You know, when you see a Mitt Romney with a car garage, okay, well, how do you think Romney got that money? Or how do you think some of these major CEOs, when Donald Trump goes over to Saudi Arabia, who do you think is going to profit from Donald Trump being in Saudi Arabia? Well, the people who he effectively had around him, those CEOs that were there. That's why they were there. And so it's not like they take that money and say, okay, we're going to do what's in the best interest of America. It's thank you very much for the cash in my pocket. I may start another business venture where I can make more profit off of it. But it's not this idea of, well, we're going to raise 800 billion people out of poverty. It's not that. It's not, we're going to build high-speed rail. It's not, we're going to build all of these buildings and these magnificent infrastructure. No, it's not that. It's different. And so we instead say, as China's fault, that our oligarchs decided to profit and keep all the money for themselves. It's like those people are out of their minds. At some point, the public is going to be like, okay, this is too, meaning it would have to get to be so low that the energy to keep it going is less than the energy to change it.
It's really interesting, you know, all the criticism that they have for China, because China feeds their students real food. We don't even feed like K through 12 real food, like in our schools, you know, like, so they're upset with China's advancements and their infrastructure. Meanwhile, our infrastructure is falling apart.
Yeah.
You know, if this is really about competition for you and you're really trying to compete, then you would be putting money and energy into improving our infrastructure, not pointing your finger at the people who surpassed us. Right. Like that's what real competition would look like, but they don't care. Our bridges are falling apart. We don't even have high speed rail in 2025. Like give me a break. So this country is falling apart, and the government, our government, is angry at the countries that are growing, like China, which is growing economically, and they do have a better infrastructure, or like Russia. You look at the subway in Moscow and compare it to subway stations here in the United States. Like, so there's this jealousy, this anger, whatever, how dare they outdo us? But all these years that went by, we have not been putting, by we, I mean our government, has not been putting money in our infrastructure, improving it. I encourage everybody to look at a website called the American Civil Engineers Society, American Society of Civil Engineers. Look at their website. They have a report card for American infrastructure, and they grade us every year. Go check out that website and see what the grades are for American infrastructure.
By the way, and I'll let you go after this, Jon Stewart, if you remember when Tucker Carlson went over to Russia, he was like, oh my God, these subways, it's like, these things are, you know, like museums. And the way that they look, they were like the architecture and everything else. And Stewart said something about, like, made a joke about candelabras. And he said, our shitty subways is the price of freedom. It's like, are you out of your fucking mind? Like the notion that you think that New York subway system is the price of freedom, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. That wasn't like, that was not what if this was the 1950s, 1960s, that is not the way they looked at the capitalistic system. Like they thought we have the best and brightest. We're competing against the Soviet Union. So our stuff have to look, you know, we have better stores, we have better products, we have a burgeoning middle class, we have free speech, that was not the way that Jon Stewart is articulating it, the way it was supposed to be. So, Sabrina, thank you for this. I kept you long. I didn't mean to keep you long. We got into the conversation about Biden and everything else. Thank you for this. Sabrina Savati, or Sabby Sabs, as she's commonly known. She's a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster. She is a member of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, a Black-led multicultural network and co-op of everyday people, activists, and allies focused on empowering our communities through education, organization, and direct action. Thank you for this. By the way, when is your next show? It's not every day, and sometimes I get the schedule wrong. I saw you on last night, but when is the next one?
Tuesday. Yeah, tomorrow night, Tuesday evening, Garland Nixon and Larry Wilkerson will be on.
That should be a good one.
Yeah.
That should be a good one. All right. You have a fantastic day. I will talk to you in a few. Be safe, okay?
Bye.
Thank you. All right, guys. We have come to the end. In fact, we are past the end. We do have a tendency to go over on the show. I want to thank all of you. Let me check out the audience to give them their heads up. The Atomic Brain, he was talking about Brian Berletic. Brian is fantastic. Did you put that twice? You put that twice. Man, you really felt that one. You were really strong about that. Sparky, the Trump administration is big picture. In the big picture, is indeed a continuation of previous administrations, like Brian says, but at least he's funnier and generally more entertaining. So there's that. Man, that is a low bar. That is a low, astonishing low bar, but fair enough, Sparky. I accept it. Sparky, fun fact, both Ukraine and Israel have taxpayer-funded healthcare, American taxpayers. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You know, I told you that time I was in Israel, I was there with my ex-wife. I needed medication, and I was running out because we were jumping from place to place. And I end up going to a doctor. The doctor sees me, gives me a prescription. I go in order to get it filled, and the medication was cheaper than what I typically pay with insurance. I think it was something like that. I don't remember paying much for that medication. I remember sitting there like, holy shit, are you serious? And she says, yeah, Americans are often shocked when they come here and need to get meds. Socialized medicine. We pay for their healthcare, or actually we pay for their bombs, but they can use that money to pay for their healthcare. Pink Rose, Biden, hope you dress cold for the hot winter. Pink Rose, Biden, hope you dress cold for the hot winter. Jarek Laval, well, Jarek, leave a comment. Thank you, though. I appreciate it. Sparky loves Sabby. She's beautiful inside and out. Yes, she is. She is fantastic. And Janice, Biden will find sympathy in the dictionary between what is this? HLT and syphilis. Fuck that war criminal. He's a despotic sociopath. Yes. Somebody, and I wish they would have put it as a super chat because it was funny as all hell. I was sitting here laughing at it. It says, cancer has a right to defend itself. I think Caitlin Johnson apparently said that. That is brutal, but funny as all hell. Cancer has a right to defend itself. It's an organism trying to live. A total economic collapse, the world will reboot into a surveillance state. Maybe, but it's going that way now, right? You don't think it's going that way now? Where they're trying to get robots to do the jobs in order to eliminate the need for workers. Okay, well, what is the thing that workers have typically used when they disagree with the state? Oh, they withhold their labor. Okay, well, what happens when robots are doing the labor? It's one thing if you trust your government, if you have robots doing the labor, okay, no issue. You have, you're in alignment. You have a more just system. That is not the way we work. That's not the way it functions, if that makes sense. I think we're heading that way now. Look at the way social media is used to go after people. Look at the way they were locking up journalists or putting journalists in jail. I mean, for fuck's sake. That seems to be the trajectory any way you look at it. And we have one more. Sabrina makes me salivate. Awesome guess. Azazel. I will, maybe she's watching the rest of this. Sometimes they watch the rest to see what people say after the fact. So she might have seen it herself. But shout out to her. She's a great guest. And we've had a fantastic show. We got up to 1,250 people here today. 1,250 people. That number is astonishing. So yeah, I'm going to say thank you to all of you. I appreciate anything that you give, help support the show. These shows have been getting demonetized, so there's that. So you effectively support the content, at the very least, the live show. And I'll leave it at this. You guys have a fantastic day. I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 158. Signing off. Have a good one. All be safe.